following Friday, which was the opening night of Shock and Awe. All right. And what had happened was the chief of the Naval Air Liaison Element, the NAIL, his name is Shortney Gortney. All right. He's about 5'8", maybe. All right. He came up to me one day in the chaos. If I was any bigger, Sluggo, I'd kick your ass. You know, he later became four-star Admiral Bill Gortney. All right. But he says he had this note from the vice CNO, who at that time was Fox Fallon, saying, if you guys aren't going to use these two carriers, they're coming home. And that was the last thing we wanted. So we looked at options on how we were going to get them into the fight. Across Syria was not going to work. Across Jordan wasn't going to work because you had to go across Israel to get there. And you know the bad blood between the Middle Easterners and Israel, although it has gotten a lot better, I must add. So the only option left was go across Egypt the long way, down the Sinai, around the Gulf of Aqaba, up through Saudi Arabia, refuel in Waibo and Wano, which were the two western anchor areas. And then they went to their central, there was 5 lanes across Iraq that were lanes at cap points across Iraq for the defensive counter air folks. And they were going to do the 3 center lanes, one below Al Assad, one below Baghdad, and one below, what was that airfield out there? Al Qut. But how are we going to get them there? And so, of course, we took out our little string and, went like this and like this and like this. I think it was 960 miles one way. Okay. So they were going to fly over 1,800 miles, almost 1,900 miles round trip with 3 hours of vault time, which was going to require a lot of freaking gas. And this is really a testament to how the Navy carrier air wings fight their fight. And Data, you understand this. Each air wing commander has his own philosophy on how he's going to fight his fight. So Dave Newland, who was the CAG 8 commander on Roosevelt, and my very good friend Moose Lakaitis, who was his DCAG, said, we're going to launch all the S3s and we're going to just load everybody to the gills over the top of the aircraft carriers that were in a battle box about 30 miles north of Alexandria, Egypt. They would come down the Sinai around Aqaba and they would show up in Wano and Waibo fairly skosh on gas. But we would have 3 KC-10s there waiting for him in formation. A lot of freaking gas, okay? The KC-10s were taking off with 320,000-pound fuel loads. So they had about 100,000-pound give from each tanker, not total, from each tanker. And, of course, we can fill them back up, too. So they made the trip down. The Tomcats and the Prowlers weren't in such a bad situation. The Hornets are always the fuel limited airplane on the deck. And again, we're not talking Super Hornets now. We're talking old C models and C plus models. All right. They were carrying what they call goofy airline tank and one on the wings. And then of course their internal fuel load. And for you to understand, they're carrying about, I think it's 9,000 pounds internal and about 3,000 pounds per external tank, if I remember right. But they're burning 8,000 pounds an hour at their tactical speeds. That gives you an idea of where we're at with the Hornets. Tomcats were burning about 8,000 pounds an hour too, but they carry a lot more gas. And so they're coming down pretty much at max conserve and across the Sinai around at Aqaba up to the KC-10s, which were waiting for them. We also threw in British VC-10s because they've got the nice soft basket. Nobody, and I mean nobody, likes to refuel off of the KC-135 Iron Maiden, the big hard basket that we got in the back of our tanker at that time. And we were just getting the multi-point refueling pods that were just coming into theater, but we had a major, major issue with them. I'll get into it in just a minute. Now, Cyrus Vance, Captain Mark Vance, who was CAG 3 on the Truman, chose to do it completely different. And what he did is he launched his 6 S3s, and they all met the S3s overhead and then pushed south over the Sinai. And they would refuel on their way down to the Sinai and get to a point where the S3 Vikings would have to turn around and come back. But at least everybody was loaded up by that time. Now, we did our first Sinai crossing on Wednesday night, the 19th. And it was just a test of the system to see if it worked. A dry rehearsal, as we called it. All right. Not so dry, but anyway, that's what we called it. And what they did is they took 2 Hornets, 2 Tomcats, and a Prowler. And Cyrus put a JDAM 31 in the tunnel of the 14s because he wanted to see what the fuel consumption would be like carrying the bomb. If we're going to test the system, let's test the system. So he was the first ones down because he was the day carrier. Newly and Moose were the night carrier on the Roosevelt. So they come down and fly these cap points, okay? They had a 6-hour vol, so they're refueling multiple times. And another 5 ship came down at the half point. So the first group came down, flew 3 hours. The next group came down, flew 3 hours. Next group off of the Roosevelt flew the night version the first 3 hours, and then the next 3 hours, and they all went home. And it worked pretty good, except for there was a few wrinkles we had to work out. All right. But it actually worked pretty good. But it was a 7.3 hour sortie. That's a long freaking time to be in a Tomcat and a Hornet and an EA6B on an ejection seat. Okay. That's like 4 pedal packs and 2 box lunches to give you an idea of what you'll go through on something like that. Okay, guys. So that was Wednesday night. We worked out all the kinks and bugs with the planners there at the KAOC. And on the 20th, they took 26 airplanes instead of 5. It was 4 Tomcats, 20 Hornets, 2 EA6Bs. And all 20 of the Hornets, and I think the Tomcats, let's see, on the Truman, it was VF-32 Swordsman. On the Roosevelt, it was VF-213 Black Lions. The Hornets were carrying 3 GPU-31 JDAMs. Okay, so they're carrying 6,000 pounds of bombs. The Tomcats are carrying 2. They're in the tunnel, though, on the forward pallet, the forward Phoenix pallets. So it's not a real high drag for them, but it is for the Hornets because it's just heavy. All right. So 2 external tanks, 3 bombs, the FLIR in one side of the fuselage, AMRAAM in the other, and then 2 AIM-9 mics on the wingtips. Pretty heavy load, particularly for a cat shot. All right. That is a ball buster for a cat shot. But they pulled it off and hit their targets. And then they did it again on the opening night of Shakana. But both of the CAGs chose to refuel their fight completely different ways, which worked. And the KC-10s came out of Al Dhafra in the UAE. And what I did was I put all of the, we call them warp pods, wingtip air refueling pods for the KC-10. We put all the warp pod KC-10s at Al Dhafra. I think we had 20 KC-10s. I think 12 of them were warps. And we were just moving airplanes into RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus because, remember I said the Turks said no. We offered them, I think, $2 billion, but their parliament voted on it and said no. And on Monday, should be the 17th, their stock market crashed. And they said, oh, wait a minute. Maybe that was a bad decision. And so later in the week, they says, you guys can fly across, but you can't put anybody here. Because Incirlik was supposed to be maxed out like it was during Desert Storm. It was going to have like 38 tankers on the ramp or something ridiculous. I mean, it was a lot. It was a big, big group of folks that were going to be there. So on the night of the 21st, which was the opening night of Shock and Awe, Cyrus and Air Wing 3 went in and they hit palaces and airfields in and around Baghdad. And then Moose and his group had targets at Fallujah. Here's a funny story about that I talk about in the podcast. So Cyrus is coming out with his 26 planes. They're on the KC-10s. And throughout the refueling, they ended up having to go to a 135s, and one of them fell out. Wasn't going to be there for an hour. And he says, well, that dog don't hunt. That ain't going to work for us. Unfortunately, there was 2 VC-10s out there. And the Western AWACS was an RAF AWACS. It was call sign Bondo. And those Bubbas were fantastic, okay? They're even better than our guys, our AWACS guys. All right? I mean, they could handle everything. Remember when the F-14 went down from the Black Knights? Mm-hmm. Bondo handled that and handled it magnificently. I happened to be up in the air in a 135 and was listening to it all. So Bondo peels off the 2 VC-10s that are out there because now they start juggling the KC-10s and the 135s, and the 135 that doesn't show up. Now what happens is the 2 VC-10s that also have wing pods for baskets are tasked to take Cyrus and his guys home. But what happens before that takes place is Moose and his package is coming up to the tankers as Cyrus and his guys are on the tankers. And it's nighttime. Everybody's on NVGs. And so Moose is getting real close, and he sees all these gaggle of airplanes on all the tanker. And he goes, Cyrus, is that you? And Cyrus goes back, Moose, is that you? He goes, yeah, get off the hoses, man. My guys need gas before we have to divert. And divert meant going into Arar, which is that airfield out in the middle of nowhere in the desert that the soft guys were operating from. And that was the last thing they wanted to do. Well, they end up getting on the hoses, getting their gas, and then this VC-10 takes them the rest of the way to fill the guys up. And then they meet their S3s over the Sinai, and they all recover. They all hit their targets, drop their bombs, and they all recover. Moose and his guys drop all their bombs. They get all the tanker stuff figured out, and they make it all the way back to the Roosevelt. And I think that was also the day, the 21st, Friday, that the Turks finally went, okay, you can come now if you'll give us money. And we did. And they told us the only thing you could do, though, is use the old Operation Northern Watch corridor, which was helpful, but not a lot of help. So what ended up happening is we had 38 KC-135s at Akrotiri. That's a lot of tankers, all right? They're sucking up a lot of gas, too, because they're taking off with 180 fuel loads. So those 38 tankers are flying 38 times 1.5, 1.6, whatever that is. I don't do math in public. And what happened was the MIPRS pods were brand new. And we were having what's called basket slaps. And any of you know the Iron Maiden, or excuse me, the MIPRS pods, they're the hose, and they have these take-up reels so that when you plug into them, you know, the hose kind of rolls up into them. Well, what we found out during our research for the basket slaps was the take-up reel springs were set for 5 knots of overtake, and the Navy refueling manual says hit the basket at 10 to 15. So what it was causing was this big sine wave that would go up to the pod, hit the pod, and come back and would snap the probe off or take the door off. Remember all you guys seeing the F-14s and the F-18s without the the probe doors? That's the reason they were off. Because even the Iron Maiden will take those things off if they don't have some finesse. So it was taking the probes off. And we were able to fix that because, and this is a shout out to Cobham. Cobham makes the pods. Cobham, if you go Google Sir Alan Cobham, he was an air refueling master and actually created the first air refueling company in October of 1934. Yeah, 1934. He'd been doing this. All right. And he's the guy that actually came up with the idea of the Hosendrobe. They kept a Meteor jet up for 12 hours and 3,600 miles behind a Avro Lancaster bomber that was made into a tanker, testing this thing. All right. They put a nose probe on the Meteor, and it was refueling. I've been in touch with that test pilot's son. The test pilot was Patrick Hornage. His son Christopher. I put something on Facebook one day, and his son Christopher, said, "Hey, that's my dad." So that's where that system came from. Now, when the Turks said you guys can overfly, that's all they would allow. So we ended up using the old Operation Northern Watch corridor, and Northern Watch had stopped on Monday the 17th. That was when Turkish Parliament says no more. And it went dead for a couple days, almost 5 days. And then they said, okay, now you can come. And what would happen was the battle box for the Roosevelt and Truman. Oh, here's another funny story real quick. They get orders to move. Roosevelt and Truman get orders to move. And they go at flank speed from Alexandria to their battle box south of Adana, Turkey, at flank speed. Data. You know what that's like.
That's
the ship
quick.
Rattles.
Yeah.
The whole ship rattles. Okay. And they did it in a driving rainstorm. Data. I mean, it rained almost the whole time as they're going up there. I've seen one picture, and you can just barely see the Truman up in front because it's raining so hard. But they make it up there, and they start flying again. I think on the 22nd or the 23rd. So what would happen is the tankers would take off. They would all meet with the tankers between the battle box and Akrotiri, and then they would all push off at the same time. Now, the AWACS and the RC-135s were also at different places in the Mediterranean. The RC-135s were at Suda Bay on Crete because that's a normal operating place for them. So they just figured that's where we're going to go into. The AWACS were also flying out of Akrotiri. And, of course, the E-2 Hawkeyes were also soaking up some of that air battle management stuff, too. But they would all go out to southeast Turkey over the Silosat Mountains in March. And whenever you're planning an air campaign, man, you really, really got to watch the weather. Because what's the weather like in March in Europe? Snowy, cold. And we had tankers also, KC-10s, at Burgas, Bulgaria. The Bulgarians had just become members of NATO. And they were all excited to be part of this campaign. And rightfully so. And so we put, I think it was 6 KC-10s at Burgas. And it was during the following week that the commander up there at Burgas called and says, we're going to have to be delayed today. And I go, whoa, why? And he's going, it snowed today. And see, I'm in Saudi Arabia in 100-degree heat. I didn't think about that. So whenever you guys do your missions, man, you've always got to think of the weather, all right? Go back and read Sun Tzu's first chapter on his 5 constants. 2 of them deal with earth and weather. All right. They can't fly KC-10s unless they inspect the tail engine, number 2 engine. Well, to do that, you have to have one of those high boy things, okay? Guess what they didn't bring with them to Burgos, Bulgaria? But I understand they found a really good workaround, and that was an old Warsaw Pact high lift or stairs that allowed them to get up there and do the inspection and clean all the snow and everything out. Now, of course, you try to keep the engines covered, but that one's up kind of high. But I didn't know that. All right. Here I am sitting fat, dumb, and happy, eating steaks at the Kayak in Sultan Air Base, and it's snowing up there. Well, I only made that mistake one time. And then I constantly looked at, okay, what's the weather today in Burgos? Well, it's also, the snow and rainy season. And my buddy Moose Lakaitis, who remains a good friend, as a matter of fact, I talked to him last week, said that some of those air refueling evolutions out there in southeastern Turkey were some of the scariest refueling evolutions he's ever done. And that was because of thunderstorms. Massive thunderstorms, because you've got all that mountainous terrain, all that moisture from the snow through the winter, and they're monster thunderstorms. So you're like going from Nogs to, the Mark 1 eyeball, the Nogs, the Mark 1 eyeball in a lightning storm. And you can imagine how screwy that is. And sure enough, the XO of his Prowler squadron took one of the hoses off one of our Mippers jets. And for which Moose is eternally grateful for. It's you, moron. So it made it even a little scarier. But we were sending, they were called Pops, Mac, and Boehner were the air refueling areas out there. So when you look at the corner there where you have Iraq, Turkey, and Iran, that was the old ONW, what we called restricted operating zone, or ROZ. And so you had Mac and Boehner right up next to the border of Iraq and Turkey. And then out to the west, we had Pops. It was named after one of the squadron commanders on the Truman, Pops Batchelder, who is another great American. I think he retired like a 2-star admiral or something like that. So we had 2 going north and south, and Pops was going east and west. Because you have to remember, for the North War, and I have a podcast episode on this, we had B-52s coming out of Fairford that were also participating in this. And then, of course, on the 26th of March, we had the 15 ship of C-17s that did the airdrop on Bashur. So there was a lot going on up there in that little area. But the 4th Infantry Division was not allowed into Turkey. And so we did it completely with SAW forces out there. And it worked out. It was strictly close air support and not a whole lot of air superiority stuff. I think Saddam only flew like 12 sorties the whole 3 weeks of the air campaign. But there was a lot of missiles fired and SAM sites. As a matter of fact, there was one SAM site in SA-2 at Mosul that took them a while to find, and it actually fired on one of the tankers. We actually moved on about day 4, day 5. We actually moved Pops and Boehner into Iraqi airspace. We left Pops where it was because the AWACS needed it and the RC-135, but we moved Pops and Boehner down near Mosul, and an SA-2 took a shot at a tanker that fortunately was already in the northern half, and so the missile just kind of went up and went down after its 22-mile trip. But, that got a lot of people's attention. Well, as the war went on, go look at where Al-Sulaymaniyah is, and it's down along the Iranian-Iraq border, and they asked us to move a tanker track down there. And I thought they were out of their minds. And I actually called Moose on the phone. I says, dude, if we do this, Moose, you've really got to take care of us, because we're hanging it out down there with the Iranians behind us. All right. And, but we did it. we put I think it was called Valley, because it was over the top of this great big green valley, beautiful green valley in that area. Northern Iraq doesn't look anything like southern Iraq. It's actually really green and beautiful. So Valley was down there near Al Sulaymaniyah, and they needed that so that the guys from the north could get closer to Baghdad as we started pushing the forces toward Baghdad, the Iraqi forces toward Baghdad. So, um, and of course, the Iranians come up on the radio, stay in your own playpen there, boys. And I think one day, one of the Iranian controllers, get on your side of the line. We're on our side of the line. If you don't get on your side of the line, we're going to send fighters up to see you. And the F-18 Hornet guy goes, okay, send them up. I'll wait. I'll wait. Excuse me. We didn't hear anything from that controller on the Iranian side from that point on. That kind of stuff went on. And there was a lot of people that were coming across the Iranian border because they saw the vacuum that was being created. And as you guys know, Qasem Soleimani made a lot of trouble for us in Iraq.
So who's doing air traffic control for all of this chaos?
Believe it or not, the E2 Hawkeyes were doing it, Data.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah. And it was, and you know what? It was tough at first, Billy, because the Air Force guys hadn't worked with E2 Hawkeyes very much. But we had our third class of the Tanker Weapons School was going through on 9/11. And so we had two more classes go through before the shock and awe campaign started. And I created the Navy portion of the syllabus. And what we did, Billy, is this is why I've got 10 cats and traps on 8 aircraft carriers as a tanker guy. We would spend a day in academics, all day, literally about 6 hours in academics. There was an Alaska airline flight that left at like 5:30 in the afternoon from Spokane down to San Diego. And we'd all jump into our hotel and we'd go, what's that place in Washington Street? There's a famous Mexican place on Washington Street down there. I mean, it's just fabulous. All right, that we'd all go to. Casa Guadalajara was the name of this place. If you ever go to San Diego, you got to go check out this Mexican food place. It's really good. But go hungry because it's a lot of food, all right? I'm not kidding, guys. They're chimichangas like this. But man, they're shredded beef chimichangas, really, really dynamite. So we'd all go there, and it was just to kind of let the guys hair down, and it was just a nice night to just sit around drinking margaritas and having Mexican food. The next morning, we would spend the morning on the USS Coronado, the AOC afloat ship, and then we'd spend the afternoon on an Aegis destroyer cruiser. Every class. And then that night, we put all of our stuff on a carrier, and that next morning, we'd go out to sea with it for a night. So they all got to experience, Billy, what it was like being on a carrier, daytime, nighttime, while they were doing CQ, or carrier qualifications, guys. And it was huge for our guys. And we taught out of the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Manual that we got from the Naval Air and Warfare Center, NSOC, out of Fallon. We taught an Air Force course out of a Navy classified manual, which had never been done before, all right? But our guys were so much smarter because of that. And Billy, I didn't even know that manual existed until I got that portion of the syllabus. And the only reason I got that portion of the syllabus is because I was the only on cadre who'd been on a carrier. And they said, okay, Sluggo, you got the Navy stuff. And I went up to Fallon I said, well, okay, where do I find out all things Navy strike and air warfare? Well, it's Fallon. And they said, oh, you want this manual? I go, what manual? They said, well, we call it attack memo right now, but it's soon going to get a stamp of approval for called the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Manual. And it literally had everything in it: how to do um, battlefield or battle group defense, long range strikes, templates for the long range strikes, templates for um, what was it called? Maritime SCAR, maritime strike coordination or reconnaissance, all those things. It was all in there. Even the weapons loads, it was incredible. But it also had all the gas on templates too, how much gas that everybody would need, which was perfect for our Air Force weapons school guys. So we had a number of guys, and at that time it was only guys that had been through the course, 5 classes worth, that had been to the Navy on the carrier, on the cruiser, on the AOC afloat ship. And it really, really made a difference in the way we operated. And a matter of fact, one of our grads was at Akrotiri, and he was invaluable to those guys. And because when it came time to set up everything, when they went into Turkey, uh, his call sign was Fosse. Fosse is the guy who created the plan for it. And it worked out because Fosse had been on a carrier and talked to all of the department heads and had talked to all the strike leads. And those are the things that we did when we were on the carrier. Now, let me tell you a difference. We did not have that advantage during Desert Storm and during Allied Force. And the Air Force tanker community was stupid when it came to air refueling the Navy. And of course, we had the Enterprise, oddly enough, with CAG 8 on board, with VF 41 and VF 14, I think, on board, dropping bombs over Kosovo. But none of us knew how the Navy did business. We were reading it all out of an Air Force manual, okay? You do not go to an Air Force manual to find out how you refuel the Navy. But we didn't know any of that stuff existed until we built our school. And I just happened to find it by going up there and go, well, this is what I'm looking for. How do you guys do your business? Oh, you want our attack memo? That'll soon be the Air Strike and Warfare Manual. And I said, where is it? And so I taught all 6 hours of academics completely out of the Air Strike, the Strike and Air Warfare Manual. And then we also spent an hour, Billy, on the MAGTAF too, and how the Marine Air Ground Task Force works, and how we would refuel with the Marine Air Ground Task Force. So we had the benefit of all of that knowledge going into Afghanistan and Iraq. As a matter of fact, when the Enterprise left to go on its deployment, that would subsequently be its 9/11 deployment. A couple days after 9/11, a guy that went through our first class, Dewey was his name, ended up on the planning staff at the KAOC at Prince Sultan for the opening night of airstrikes in Afghanistan. And the Air Wing commander, the deputy Air Wing commander, was a guy named Mercer, Merc Mercer. And he sees Dewey and he points at him and he goes, where have I met you? I know you from somewhere. And he says, hey, I'm one of those tanker guys that went through that school. And he turned around, looked at all of his guys, and he goes, guys, air refueling's not going to be a problem because he knows how we do it. And it wasn't. We were able to put all those things together, to really help the Navy out and the Marine units out too. But again, all of that happened during the shock and awe, preparing for the shock and awe. We literally had to replan the whole entire air refueling campaign for shock and awe in the 6 weeks leading up to the fight because of diplomatic clearances. We were not allowed to go into certain places. All right. Also, you have to remember, the Saudis and the Qataris do not get along at all. And they get along great with the Bahrainis because when the Saudis want to go drink and
They go to
have fun,
Bahrain.
they go to Bahrain. Yeah,
Yeah.
Billy, you know that because you've been to Bahrain. They go to Bahrain. All right. And so the Bahrainis and the Saudis get along famously, but the Qataris and Saudi do not. And so when it came time for us to fly airplanes from Qatar into Saudi airspace, um, we had a few roadblocks for that. Fortunately for us, we had a Saudi 3-star that was a member of the royal family that was working the kayak with us. This is a name, gentlemen, that you've never heard before. His name is General Badr Al Othman, and he is a rock star for Shah Kana that you'll never hear about. He is the Saudi, he's the uncle to, at that time, King Fahd. I think it was King Fahd at the time. He was his nephew, King Fahd's nephew. So, and he was a 3-star and he was an F-15 pilot. And he'd spent 8 years in the States. He spoke really, really good English. Now, his aide, no English whatsoever. And so General Batter and I would talk back and forth and work problems out and everything. And his office was right outside the battle cab. And you'll hear about this, Craig, in the episode. And some of you guys may not like this, but we did it anyway. We actually brought General Batter into a skiff on the opening night of the war.
What?
Yes, we did.
You brought a
We
foreign
into a
national into a skiff?
Yes, we did. The battle cab was a skiff because we had linguists and Predator guys and some of the other 3-letter agencies, okay? And we brought a Saudi 3-star. I knew, Billy, this would get you riled. But you know what? It was the right thing to do. All right. And
Well, you're not in jail, so it's probably okay.
well, and here's the thing, though. Okay, one of the biggest problems we had was how do we share our information with a lot of these folks that are fighting right there along with us?
Yeah.
We cannot go into a fight and say, well, you're not cleared for this information because it may get you killed. And so General Mosley had to make the decision on who could get stuff off of like the RC-135, and of course now the Brits have RC-135s and they're sharing their stuff with the Australians. And that's what happened was there was something that happened where the Australians weren't getting the right information. And the group commander there was like, do you guys have anything on this? And he saw us kind of like going,
Not that you know of.
yeah, and he goes, dudes, you've got to share this with us. And so General Mosley made the decision, we have to. If they're part of this fight, then let's make them part of this fight. And General Batter was up there. And so about 3 minutes into the opening Friday night, somebody said, sir, we have to bring General Batter in. And Mosley said, you're absolutely right. And so I was sitting at the table right behind the desks where we had General Mosley, the CFAC, General Dave Nichols, the deputy CFAC, all 3-stars, Buck Buchanan, the 2-star, who was the Operation Southern Watch commander. We had 2 linguists that were next to them that were listening to Saddam's networks, all right, and they're blabbing in Arabic. And then next to them, we had the Predator LNOs, because we had 6 Predators up the opening night of Shah Kana. 6 Predators. And we thought, holy smokes, that's a lot. Well, later on, there was like 20 of them. And so you can imagine, we've got 3 RC-135s. We've got 3 rivet joints, 2 Cobra balls, 2 E8 joint stars, 3 AWACS, E2 Hawkeyes, and I think 3 U2s flying on the opening of Iraqi Freedom, and 6 Predators. Do you know how much information that is coming into you?
Almost too much.
You're right, Billy. It's almost too much. Okay. And you look at the screen, and the screen is a 40-foot by 40-foot wall screen with the projector on it. And you're like going, holy smokes, how are we going to make all this out? because it's just cluttered. It's got everything on it. So you got to start filtering stuff out. Well, what do you filter out? I don't know. Well, again, all that information's coming in, and we've got the Australians with their F-18s flying missions, and of course we've got the RAF with their Tornadoes and their GR7s flying missions too. And finally, we said we can't keep playing this "I got a secret" thing. We're all in this together. And so, at about 3 minutes into the opening night of the air campaign, somebody said to General Mosley, "Hey, shouldn't we bring General Batter in here and let him watch?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." So somebody went out and got him, and I was sitting at the desk behind them that had the whole of a rack in tactical pilots charts. What's that? 5,000 to 1 or something, like 500,000 to 1. I mean, it's really, really down granular because you would go to it to look up lat longs of targets and everything. Okay. And he came down and sat next to me. Hey, Sluggo, how you doing? Doing good, sir. Welcome to the opening night. And I handed him the map cell brief, the Master Air Attack Plan cell brief, okay? That had secret no foreign written on it. And I handed it to the South. Send me to jail. I don't care. At this point in my life, I don't care. And I opened it to the time slice from 9 o'clock local was H-hour to 5 minutes. It was in 5-minute time slices for like the first 3 hours. So you can imagine that thing was thick. And I said, okay, here's where we're at. Wave 2 is coming in right now. And we had Al Arabia, Al Jazeera, and CNN on these screens over here, these 3 big screens. And it seems like there was a 4th one on the other wall that had Fox News on it, okay? And of course, they're all, talking and everything. And I just said, here's where we're at, sir. And showed him on the map, on the map brief where we were at. And he just watched. And he didn't say anything. And I'm kind of getting concerned at this point, like, is he okay? Because he's normally, pretty talkative, particularly to me, because we'd spend a lot of time talking to each other. And then finally he looks over at me and goes, Sluggo, this is the greatest display of firepower I've ever seen in my life. And I remember thinking to myself, some of these people think we're the great Satan. And yeah, your version of the great Satan has great power. And on my YouTube channel, my YouTube shorts, I have a little quick video where it shows the TLAMs coming into his version of his capital area, Saddam's capital area. And you can actually see him come falling in like this. Now, 9 o'clock local Baghdad time was the H-hour. And at about 8 seconds to that time period, straight up, we started hearing the motors of the TLAMs coming across the Al Rashid Hotel, all right? Because it's 20 years later, I can do this, right? I can tell you guys this. We use the Al Rashid Hotel as an initial point.
As a waypoint.
As a waypoint. Yeah. Because it's pretty prominent. If you see it, it's pretty prominent. All right. And so we could hear the motors of the TLAMs coming in. And of course, the air launched from the B-52s is also coming in, all right? And you hear the over the top of the Rashid Hotel. Because I can't remember who it was, but one of the media groups set up on the balcony right outside their room. And it was right across from his palace and the his capital area, everything, and had a really, really good front row seat to a lot of bombs and TLAMs coming in. And they got some really sharp video. And you can see these little white things going with boom and boom and boom, and you can hear the motors on it too. I had gone into the battle cab at about 8:25 thinking, where's the best place to watch this opening? And of course, to watch the opening would be the best place is behind the commander and see what he sees and hear what he hears. So I walked in and, Mosley turned around and said, "Hey, Sluggo, what are you doing?" I said, "Just looking for a place to watch where the war starts, sir." He goes, "Well, sit down. I may have some questions for you," because gas was a real problem, which I'll get into here in a minute. I can't believe I just did an episode on all this. If you guys listen to the episode, you'll hear all this stuff again. But download it anyway, please. And we're just talking, And at about 8:45, Wolf Blitzer realizes that, hey, they're starting to shoot missiles, starting to shoot more guns. He goes, "I don't know when Shock-and-Awe is supposed to happen, but it's getting pretty active outside, And Mosley was looking at the screen. He goes, "Wait 15 minutes, Wolf." And at about 8:30, the commander of the USS Laboon, which is a Aegis destroyer, we had a command net that everybody was on. It was called AC-1. And the commander of the Laboon made a radio call that made us laugh and made us fairly somber at the same time. As most of you know, the Tomahawk land attack missiles are called Greyhounds. They're nicknamed Greyhounds because they're painted gray, kind of like the racing dog, right? And they're really an incredible weapon. They really are. They've got different types of warheads they put in them. They use them for different kinds of things. I'm not telling you anything you don't even know. If you're in a sub, they can be fired from a sub, from their vertical launch systems. They can be fired from ships, all kinds of things. They're really an incredible tool. And we made them kind of tactical, which is kind of interesting too. Anyway, so the Greyhounds are getting ready to launch, and we know that because, again, we've got that map out. We're looking at it when all the timing is. And from the Northern Arabian Gulf to the targets in Baghdad was about, I think, between 25 and 30 minutes. And the commander of the USS Laboon gets on AC-1 and in a perfect British accent goes, "Sir, we've released the hounds." We all just start busting up, okay? And we're all laughing, and all of a sudden it gets real quiet. And nobody says anything. And Mosley turns around with his arms folded like he always does. And he goes, "Well, gentlemen, strap in. Here we go. You can't call those things back." And so now we knew it was going to happen. And so this was about 8:30, 8:35. And it was just eerie and kind of surreal knowing the commander of the Laboon, "Sir, we've released the hounds." And then to hear the hounds coming over the top of the Al Rashid Hotel and other places dropping in on their targets. I found a really good video, believe it or not, of all of this that goes for about 9 minutes without anybody saying anything. I don't know who videotaped it. I don't know where it came from, but it's fairly close up. It's right across the river from his palaces and his Capitol building and everything. And you can see and hear these things dropping in. And remember at this time period too, GBU 31 2,000-pound JDAMs were all we had. We didn't have the 500-pounders or the 1,000-pounders. Actually, no, the Navy had 1,000-pounders at the time, GBU 32s. But most everybody was carrying the crowd pleasers. And when a B-2 bomber drops them from his operating altitude, by the time they get to 20 to 18,000 feet, they're going supersonic because it's 2,000 pounds with no drag just coming down at you. And it sounds like a sheet ripping, like a bed sheet ripping. And so we could hear the sound of the T-LAMs, and we could also hear the sound of the sheet ripping of the JDAMs coming in at the same time too. And then of course you see all the guns shooting, you hear all the guns going off, you can see the SAM missiles going off, Um, and we had used the same method that they used during Desert Storm to kind of saturate the Baghdad, what we called super missile engagement zone. A matter of fact, the same guy that did the planning for Desert Storm, his name is Larry Huba Henry. And Huba created the IADS takedown in the first couple of days of Desert Storm. He actually came back to Shaw in the January timeframe and briefed the map guys on here's how I did it and here's how you guys should do it based on the new GPS weapons, the GPS aided harms, Tomahawk land attack missiles, or F-117s, B-2s, whatever. I don't remember B-2s and F-117s going after SAM sites, but I remember them going after like the operations centers and things like that, and busting them open. So, kind of a long answer to your question. But let me go back to the three carriers that are down in the Northern Arabian Gulf. So we've got Lincoln, who has been out for months. They actually are out on a 10-month deployment. We have Constellation, which this is its last hurrah. And we have the Independence that came over from Atsugi, Japan. So we've got 5 carriers in the region, 2 flying up north, 3 flying down south, with F-14s and the very first Super Hornet squadron to see action in combat. Oh, that's a funny story. You know how Mike Rowe has, his most dangerous jobs? Somebody actually made like a little cartoon out of this. Most dangerous job in Iraq: spoon rest van driver. Because we were hunting those things down like crazy. Well, the Super Hornets of VFA 115 were the very first Super Hornets to fly combat missions. And so they wanted to do everything they could in the Super Hornets lineup of missions. One of those being refueling. Well, they were loaded with a center line, and I think they would take off with like 3 JDAMs and then another wing tank. Everybody, all the Hornets were flying in this goofy gas configuration, they call it. And they were out hunting these spoon rest vans that would show up at different places and radiate for a while and then close up shop and then move. Because they knew what our kill chain was. They knew that if they moved, that we'd have to do the whole approval system all over again. They knew it almost as well as we did. Well, one day, the Predator caught one of these spoon rest vans as it was getting ready to set up. So it would be there for about 20 minutes. And who are you going to call? You're going to call a Super Hornet because they've got to get the first bombs on target. And sure enough, they dropped one of these GBU 31s on this spoon rest van, okay? It's like hitting a Escalade with a 2,000-pound bomb or a Rabbit with a 30-06. It actually blew it into the air. And the wheels are coming off, and the thing came down upside down on fire. All right? And it was kind of interesting because it was just kind of smoldering at first. And by the time the Predator left, they found a second one through electronic intelligence and sent the Predator off to it and had the 2 Super Hornets go to the tanker and get gas. And of course, this is when we're doing the Southern Watch, but Southern Watch is building up like crazy. But they said, we got to get the Super Hornets first bombs on target, and that was the day they did it. Well, they find the second one, and this 2,000-pound bomb, the first one hits like next to it, like its right rear axle, and blows it to smithereens. This one hits the frickin' van square, and it blows parts for like 300 feet in diameter. I mean, it really made a mess. And so the Super Hornet guys went home that night going, woohoo, we dropped bombs. Now, I mentioned to you that one of their jobs is organic air refueling. And so they had 2 or 4 of them in what they call the 5 wet configuration. So it's got 4 external tanks in the buddy store on the center line. And they're like going, okay, we want to use it as a tanker. We want to use it to refuel. And I said, oh, perfect. I'll tell you where we're going to put it. We're going to put it over Kuwait. We had this one area over Kuwait, offshore of Kuwait, that was called Pirates. I said, we're going to make him hang out there. Well, during Desert Storm, we'd actually had the the KA6s and A6s that were configured for tankers on the wings of the tankers, just hanging out. And we had some airspace colonel that said, we will not do that again. And I'm like, are you kidding me? All right. I can fly 26 airplanes up to the wing of the tanker and you won't let these things hang out? No, whatever. So he says, you got to put them at least 4,000 feet. I said, okay, we'll put them 4,000 feet below the tankers. But the really cool thing is they maintain their air-to-air capability. So they sent them up with 2 AMRAAMs, 2 Sidewinders on the wings, a full gun with their 5 wet configuration so they can refuel. And then when it ran out of gas, he just like looked around, okay, where's the KC-10? Oh yeah, there it is. Okay. And he'd go to it and fill back up. And so we just recycled it that way, okay, with this centerline hose. And I remember all the Navy planners coming back to me, saying how that worked great. Can we move it up, next to the KC-10? I said, no, I already got a big no on that one. All right. Got my hand slapped already for trying that. And I said, okay, whatever. So sometimes they would put 2, in formation, 2 of the Super Hornets in formation. And then toward the end of the war, the Nimitz was coming to replace the Lincoln. And they wanted to get some of their airplanes into the fight. So they had some guys that had some experience. So 2 VF-41 Black Aces F model Super Hornets and 2 VF-14 single seat Top Hatter Super Hornets left the Straits of Malacca and flew to Diego Garcia. And Billy, that's a long drive.
That's a haul.
That's a real long drive. Okay. So the S3 Vikings, went to the maximum of their range and came back to the ship. And this 4 ship of Super Hornets got left. And then, of course, they were all 5 wet too. And then went to Diego Garcia. Well, as all of you can imagine, there is no place for them to land if something goes wrong. And I don't know if you guys know this. The sharks in the Indian Ocean are big. They have big great white sharks in the Indian Ocean because there's a lot of big ones around Diego Garcia. But they make it to Diego. And we tasked a KC-135 with a basket on it, one of the Iron Maidens, to refuel those 4 airplanes up to air refueling track we called El Dorado, and it was about 3.5 hours north of Diego Garcia. So these guys were, cycling on and off and everything until they got to El Dorado. And then the 135 dropped them off, and they went the rest of the way in this 5 wet configuration full of gas up to the Lincoln, and then landed on the Lincoln. And they downloaded all of their buddy stores and wing tanks and put them on 4 other Super Hornets. So we actually ended up having 4 more Super Hornets, 8, I think, in all, with this refueling configuration on them. Now, later on in my career, I got to meet one of the pilots that was from the Black Aces that flew this thing. And he said, when he got out of the middle of the ocean, Sluggo, we were pretty lonely. This is pretty lonely being out here in the middle of nowhere with nothing but ocean and sharks, But, fortunately, everything turned out the way it was supposed to, and it worked out fine. So they ended up coming up there. Oh, And the other thing about these guys was these Super Hornets had the new joint helmet mounted cueing system, which the 115 guys did not. So this was the first battle test of the new joint helmet mounted cueing system, which this pilot that I got to talk to, his name was Mark Weisengerber. He goes by, he's call signs Gerber, said that this was the perfect fight to test the combat capability of the joint helmet mounted cueing system, because by the time they got there, it's all ground targets, you know. And with the joint helmet mounted cueing system, you have the little target designator box right there in front of your eyeball. And you just look at a tank and push the acquisition button, look at another tank, push the acquisition button, look at a BMP, push the acquisition button, and it's in the shoot list. And now you can share that with anybody without talking through Link 16. They said it was just fabulous, you know, how they could use that thing. And of course, it's tied to all the sensors in the airplane, the radar, the AT-FLIR, as they called it, and it would look wherever they were looking. So that was another piece of equipment that got its first combat use during Operation Iraqi Freedom. So, hang on, it's getting dark in here. Turn the light on real quick.
We need to get that target list capability rather than just putting mark points down.
Yeah.
We got more snow the other day. We're supposed to get 2 more inches tonight. As all you guys know, the West has been getting a lot of snow over the last little while. You know? I think Alta, which is up at the top of one of the Cottonwood Canyons, is reporting they've got over 500 inches. It's a lot of snow. It's too bright. That's better. All right, what else? Long answer to a short question.
Yeah, a little.
You know how it is when you get me going.
Yeah, I know. You can go forever, man. Always good. Let's see. The second question I had was the operations around the tanker. So, basically
Okay.
procedures that receivers would do around the tanker, comms and formations, and
Actually,
getting on and off the
another-
tanker.
A great question. Okay. So obviously with different airplanes, we had different speeds. Let me go through the slower speed Bubbas, all right? Like the A10 MC AC-130s, all right? MC AC-130s, we did at 3,000 feet. Most of the time, the AC-130s, we could do up to the 8 to 10,000 foot, but they couldn't get much higher than that because they were so loaded down. I mean, they were loaded to the gills with ammunition. The MC-130s, of course, were running around Iraq, dropping soft teams off and then resupplying them also in some pretty strange places. The A-10s, we would refuel between 9 to 11,000 feet. They have the same engines that the S3 has, so not a lot of oomph, particularly when you've got all 10 hardpoints loaded with weapons. And they would normally go right to left in order, all right, whatever order that happened to be. And a lot of times that just depended on how much gas somebody had. You know, okay, refueling order is going to be this. We didn't care about the refueling order. We just cared knowing about how much did they need. So they would always move right to left. Now, with the F-117s, things are a little different. You're only allowed to put 2 F-117s on a tanker because they're flying at night, they're blacked out, hard to see. And an overrun, meaning the tanker ends up behind the F-117s, is a potentially very dangerous situation because now you've got 2 airplanes stealthed up, painted black, that are going to have to maneuver to get back to the tanker. And one of my best buddies is an F-117 guy, and he goes, that is one of the scariest things we do in that airplane is an overrun where we get ahead of the tanker. And what we do is we do this S-turn thing like this to get back behind him. But he told me he's only had to do it twice. And both times it scared the crap out of him because he couldn't see his wingman. We call them cockroaches because they're black and they only come out at night. And the overrun situation is difficult for him. And so we only have two on the wing, and they actually don't require a whole lot of gas because they go in, takes them 30 minutes to get to where they're to Baghdad area, and then they come out, get their post-strike gas. And in this war, they were at Al Udeid, the Rams. I think that's the 8th Fighter Squadron. Anyway, so that was pretty much how we did those airplanes. Now, when you have 26 plane alpha package, then of course you're in cell. Because the problem isn't the amount of gas, it's the contact points. You can have 1 billion pounds in the air, but if you only got one hose that only can pump 1,000 pounds through it, you've got a problem. That's where the Bippers pods and the warp pods saved our bacon. Because now we can put 2 receivers on the hoses instead of 1 like we did on the Iron Maiden. And oh, by the way, we can only do basket receivers because the boom drogue adapter for the Iron Maiden makes us into a drogue tanker, and that doesn't come off in flight. That's why these pods were so important, so we can do 2 at a time. Typically, the airplanes the Tomcats were getting about 10, Hornets were getting about 8 to 10, EA-6B is about the same. The EA-6Bs, the difference with them was they would have multiple vols that they were covering. So they would go in, jam, or shoot their harm, come out, get gas, go in with another package, jam, shoot a harm, come back out. Whereas the bombers of the Tomcat bombers and Hornet bombers go in, drop their stuff, and come home. It was the same thing with the F-16 CJ Wild Weasels. They would cover multiple strike packages until they were either told to go home at the end of their vol time or they didn't have any more weapons. But it was always a right to left movement for all the receivers. And the most you can have on a KC-135 is 8 at a time. So if you got 26 airplanes, do the math, okay? It's 3 to 4 tankers. And I said, as the chief of the airfield control team, we weren't going to do 5-ship tanker streams like we did during Desert Storm. It's just too hard to manage, particularly if you have to do defensive maneuvers and retrograde 5 airplanes at once at night on a moonless night over a desert. It's a safety issue. So the most we did was 3. Now we would stack them up above each other, 3 airplanes up above each other, and they may have portions of a package at the lower altitudes as well, and then a portion of a package at the higher altitudes, because you try and keep all the packages together. Now with the B-52s and the B-1s, normally at home we do those guys on tracks, but again, we didn't have the luxury of doing tracks. So we had to do them in anchor areas. And an anchor area is like a NASCAR track with left-hand turns. That's all it is. But there's some thinking that had to go into these. And it's all based on the B-1. When the B-1 gets heavier with gas and all of its 24 bombs, and remember, they're carrying 24 GBU-31 JDAMs, so they're heavy. The problem is when they get to heavier weights, they have to go into afterburner in order to keep up with the tanker. Well, to keep them from doing that, we would shallow our bank angle from 30 degrees to 15 degrees, but we were going 320 knots so that they could be fairly stable. Well, at 320 knots, 15 degrees, that's a pretty big turn circle. And so that's why we made all of the air refueling anchor areas 70 miles long by 30 miles wide, 40 miles wide. All right. It was because of the B1. And that rule that you had to go 15 degrees of bank and 320 knots. And that turn radius, of course, is pretty good size at that speed. And that was, again, all based on the B1s. Now, we never had B-52s in formations. We never had B-1s in formation. The B-2s were always single ship, in and out. And for the B-2, it was seriously go in, drop your bombs, and come right back out. And a lot of times, you know, they'd drop their weapons, and it was like the Imperial probe droids coming out of the bottom of the airplane. You know, the JDAMs just go woof in all the directions that they needed to go to their individual targets. Because when the doors are open, some of the older, longer range radars can actually get hits on them when the doors are open. And that's why the F-117, the F-22, B-2, F-35 have really fast acting doors. Open, close, open, close. They're not so stealthy when the doors are open. So that's kind of the process that we had to go through for refueling stuff. And that was our process and our thinking as we did this. Now, that all changed on about night 4 of the war when General Mosley said, Sluggo, we got to move the gas into Iraq. And we were not prepared for this on night 4. And what happened was General McKiernan, Marines, Task Force Tarawa, and the 3rd ID were racing to Baghdad to see who could get there first. I mean, they're just hauling it up. All of you saw all of the media stuff that just shows these guys just hauling like crazy to get across. And the gas was in the wrong place in Saudi. So he came up to me and said, Sluggo, we got to move the gas up. And I went, you know, and he could see the, you know, I wasn't too happy with that. He goes, just figure it out. I said, okay, we'll figure it out. So we finally get tankers in Iraq, but I tell all the tankers, our biggest enemy is not the Iraqis. Our biggest enemy is running into each other because of all these airplanes, right? And I say in the podcast episode that the southern border of Iraq along Saudi Arabia goes from Louisville, Kentucky to Raleigh, North Carolina, 634 miles. Now, imagine trying to pack 300 airplanes, Tomahawk land attack missiles, air-launched cruise missiles, helicopters, MC-130s, AC-130s, all in that airspace. So you have to procedurally deconflict, and you have to altitude deconflict. That's how we did it. And so you have to make roads and highways and all those kinds of things up there. Well, when we moved the tankers into Iraqi airspace, we had to build a road system to the 2 tracks that we put almost directly south of Baghdad down along, all of you know where that little like diamond disputed zone you see on maps of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. There's like this disputed area along the Iraqi-Saudi border. We called it the Klingon neutral zone. And that's where that was. And we put them literally right north of that. I named all of the Iraqi tracks, all the Iraqi anchor areas after female country western singers. Reba and Shania were the first 2. Shania on the west, Reba on the east. We later put Mila, from Mila Mason, on the other side of Reba. We had Leanne over the Al-Anbar province, because that's where the majority of the Scuds came from. Later in the war, we put Martina up along the highway from the Damascus-Baghdad highway, because that was where a lot of the guys, the leadership guys, were fleeing on that highway trying to get into Syria. We put Faith directly south, east of Al-Assad, southwest of Al-Taqaddum, because you had to have faith in the Eagle guys that they'd protect you to get there. And then when we went in after Jessica Lynch, we put one near Karbala that we called Patsy. And that was pretty much the refueling areas. And they stayed that way for a couple of years.
Wow.
Yeah, they stayed that way for a couple of years because this is 2003. I went back there in 2005 and they were still using all these. Matter of fact, the guys were asking me a lot of questions. Well, why did you do it this way? Why did you do this? Why did you do this? Why did you do this? So they still had a lot of those things in use. Who came up with the name, the country western name? You know, General Mosley got a big kick out of that too. Okay, who's the female country western fan? Anyway, so we had those all arranged because now we're racing toward Baghdad and we need to shorten the distance that they had to go get gas because their on station times over and to be able to provide closer support wasn't enough. And by moving these things up like that, it allowed us to do that. Now, tankers had their lights full up, full on. And they got shot at by some of Saddam's science projects. And he had all these missile science projects and gun science projects, everything he was doing. So we were getting in a lot of what we call sapphire events. And in one night, we got a bunch of them. Scared everybody pretty good. And as I was reading them, I'm like, wait a minute. They're getting fired at from the south? He's in Reba and he's getting fired at from the south. That just didn't make any sense. So we had a gal, her name was Jennifer, over in the Joint Intelligence Center, who all she did was sapphire events, all right? Absolutely drop dead gorgeous. She belonged on the cover of a magazine. Everybody wanted to go by Jennifer's desk. I was there strictly business. I heard that. And I gave her these 7 sapphire reports one night and I go, Jennifer, I don't understand this. Some of it's coming from the north, but some of it's coming from the south. Can you track this down for me? Here's my number at my desk. When you got an answer, just give me a call. We'll talk. So about an hour and a half later, she called me. She goes, you need to come over. And I go, it's that bad? She goes, well, I wouldn't say it's bad. And whenever an intelligence person tells you that, I wouldn't say it's bad, then you have to be very, very, all right? So I walk over there with my strategy guy, Gramps, and she lays them all down. She says, okay, these 4 were Saddam. These 3 you need to go talk to the Army. And I'm like, wait, what? What did you say? She said, yeah, these 4 were science projects underneath you. You need to figure out a way to deal with them. But these 3 we think are the Army. And of course, they were the 3 coming from the south. Well, in our haste to move things into Iraq and our abject stupidity, we didn't talk to the Army. The Army guys are racing to Baghdad. That's all we thought they were doing. What we found out was the Army was doing time-sensitive targeting with ATACMs and MLRS. And when they shot the MLRSs, they didn't have to open a restricted operating zone and tell anybody they were doing it. My tankers were being fired at by Army rocket systems. So I brought those things back, and Gramp says, you got this one, brother. You got to tell the troops. And I went up to the map cell, and I got everybody together. And I said, okay, guys, we need to talk. Of course, the map cell chief and everybody looking at me like, what do you got that we all need to hear? And I said, you wanted tracks in Iraq. You got tracks in Iraq. But here was the cost. Have any of you guys been asking the Army what they're doing? Well, we got the BCD downstairs and all that. I said, have any of you guys gone down and asked the questions where they're at and what they're doing? And of course, none of us had. And so I tell them, all right, guys, the multiple launch rocket systems, because I went by the BCD first, because here was another joint problem that we had. Their Blue Force tracker did not talk to our, God, what was it called? Our computers. Their computers didn't talk to our computers. So we didn't have the same common operational picture. And I literally went to the BCD and the Army guys, of Falcon View. And I had our Falcon View thing of where our tracks were. Okay, and I had it kind of blown up. And on a single sheet of 8x11, 8.5 by 11 paper. And they looked at it and all their eyes about popped out of their head. Sir, you can't do that. You should have talked to us first. I said, yeah, I know that now. And so they printed off a piece of paper that was about the same scale as ours. And I literally put them together and held them up to the light like this. All right. And the southern edges of our Reba, our Shania, Reba, and Mila were exactly over the top of the multiple launch rocket systems and ATACMS. Now, why is that a problem? The multiple launch rocket systems they can shoot to 28,000 feet, 32 on a good day. The ATACMS can go to 102,000 feet. They were shooting over everybody, including the U-2 spy planes. The U-2 LNO was a guy by the name of Randy who had been a navigator in the 909th Air Refueling Squadron when I was in Okinawa. He and I knew each other really well. And I said, Randy, we need to talk. The Army is shooting over us. And, oh, by the way, U-2, no pun intended. He goes, oh, we're way above you guys. It'll be all right. I said, no. I said, Randy, do you know how high an ATACM goes when they shoot it into Baghdad? He goes, no. So it goes to 102,000 feet. And he goes, what? I said, yeah, here they are right here. Okay. And I held the thing up to the light like this so he could see it. And he goes, we're orbiting right here, right here, right here. And I said, yeah, that means they're going over the top of you. They're shooting over the top of you guys. You guys are so busy looking up this way that you don't realize that stuff's coming from the south going over your head. Well, the Army was really happy about this when they found out. They said, oh, well, this is good. And all they did was move all of their MLRSs and ATACMs north of the air refueling areas. But we still had to deconflict from those guys. And so we had to move our little highway system around a little bit to make sure that they wouldn't shoot at us, right? So, Craig, when you ask about, what your process for moving guys through, well, we had to take into account some things that we didn't normally coordinate with. We didn't coordinate with the Army on this kind of stuff. We're the big Air Force, man. We're the big gorilla on the block. We'll just go wherever we want. No, you can't do that. And we found out the hard way. Now, we had a couple of folks in tankers that were saying in their turn, oh, look, they're firing at us up here to the north, up high. And we later found out what that was the fighters, when they do what's called their fence check, pop a couple flares or a couple of the chaff. And when those bloom, it looks like they're popcorn shooting off, all right? Or the flares are coming down like this. And that got a couple of the tanker guys a little riled. And we had to tell them, no, that's part of what the fighter guys do. So anyway, all of these things are happening. And I got to figure out a way. The tanker team has to figure out a way to go in to Iraq with our tankers, but be safe about it, reduce the risk. So we came up with one way to do that. And that was the fighter guys were always in 4 ships. So what would happen is 2 would come up and refuel while 2 were down rooting around on their pods hunting for stuff that would shoot at them. I later went into the special ops liaison element, the Soul. I said, would you help us with this? And typical Green Beret, you mean you're going to give me more things to shoot at? Yes, that's exactly what we're going to do. And so they put that word out fairly quickly. I think it went out that night. All right, guys, look for any science projects, air defense systems. All right. And they went on the hunt for them too. So they're hunting Scuds and they're hunting these things too, these science projects on wheels, and they're finding them. One group found a Roland vehicle. A Roland is a French air defense system that Saddam had in his inventory. And they just frickin' filled it with holes, like 102 holes in it. 50 caliber, 5.56. I mean, they just shot that thing up, right? But the funniest one was one soft guy had another one of these SA-8 vehicles go by, or was turning off like right in front of them, in front of their hide site, and they're getting a little worried, where's this thing going? Well, one of these unshaven, unwashed soft guys go, I know what I'm going to do. And he takes his javelin off of his shoulder and fires it at the SA-8 vehicle. Puts the tube down, gets out of his hide site, and starts running toward the SA-8 with the missile still in the air. And he's hollering back at his bros, take a picture when the missile hits. Take a picture when the missile hits. And as the missile is starting to come down, they're all hollering at him. Hi, hon. Thanks. They're all hollering at him. Turn around, turn around. And he turns around and goes, right as the javelin smacks this SA-8 on this highway. And there's parts and pieces flying everywhere. All right. Well, about a night or two later, I'm still commiserating, we're still getting shot at. And the A-10 LNO, his name is Oatmeal. They call him Oatmeal, was his call sign. And he hears me commiserate about, getting shot at here in southern Iraq. And he looks up and he goes, Sluggo, what are you talking about? And I go, well, my good man, Oatmeal, we're still getting shot at. He goes, what do you mean you're still getting shot at? He says, we got stuff still coming up at us. Sluggo, those are hog targets. Have them all go to White 1 and tell us where they're at off the bullseye, and we'll go punch their lights out. And I said, my good man, Oatmeal, come down here and talk to me just for a second. And so literally on the fly, Oatmeal, and again, Gramps, my strategy guy, and I think Bart Odell, my tanker planner for the South, we sat down, we went, okay, so where are you guys at? He goes, well, we're flying here and here and here. We got a detachment at Arar that goes with the helicopters. So if somebody goes down, we escort them in, escort them out. And I said, I'll make you a deal. If you can take those A-10s that are on CSAR alert and put them underneath the tankers in Shania, Reba, and Mila, and of course he looks at me, who's the female country western singer star? Who's the guy that likes that? And I said, me. Okay, let's keep going here. Focus with me, Oatmeal. And we worked it all out so that the hogs would be underneath them. And if those hogs needed to go after and find somebody and escort the helicopters, they were the first ones on the tanker. We'd fill them back up and off they would go. That was the deal I made with him. Sure enough, the next night, the hogs are all up there and they're finding stuff and they're gunning it and doing all kinds of crazy things with them. And Oatmeal's bringing the stuff down to us going, hey, we found a SA-8 system here. We found a Roland over here. We just thought you'd want to see, here's a guy rolling in on it, blowing it up, everything like that. So that's how we mitigated the threat to the point where within a day or two, everything stopped shooting at us because they knew if they did, some fighter was going to drop an LGB on them, or some hog was going to roll in on them and take them out. But that was all the things that we had to do because of the risk. You know, I taught a class at when I was at the Joint Forces Staff College. Excuse me, I'm on the tail end of a cold, so I got to get some drink in my system here. Wash it down. I taught this at the school, and I actually heard this from the Brigadier General who came up with this idea. And all of you have probably heard of, you know, observation, orientation, decision, action loop, the OODA loop. Well, I found another one, and you guys might want to write this down. It's called the elements of the decision maker's dilemma. And there's 4 of them: risk, time, quality of knowledge, quality of knowledge, and outcomes. And what this Brigadier General Wayne Michael Hall was telling us was, if you have valuable knowledge in a timely manner, you can reduce risk because you act with more certainty, with a decrease in second and third order effects. And Craig, I'll write all that down so that I can send it to you and you can send it out to your guys. All right. It comes from his book called Warfare in the 21st Century. And he came and taught us this. You know, again, those elements are risk, time, quality of knowledge, and outcomes. He says every brain on this planet, whether you're 2 years old or 102 years old, goes through the same process. And he's saying, you know, your Air Force Bubba came up with the OODA loop and everything like that, but I want to refine that a little bit. And he came up with these 4 elements, the elements of the decision maker's dilemma. In any combat situation, you have to figure out, how are you going to reduce risk? If you're an infantryman on the ground, the best way to reduce risk is have a slew of F-15s, Strike Eagles above you, loaded to the gills with GBU-12 500-pound laser-guided bombs, which is the one we had at the time. And we flew a lot of sorties with that, particularly after that windstorm went through, that Shamal that went through. They dropped 1,100 GBU-12s in a 24-hour period from 96 F-15E sorties, Strike Eagle sorties. There were that many targets after the Shamal moved off, because Saddam thought, oh, they're on our home turf now, and then they came out of their hiding places, and there was just stuff everywhere. So in order to reduce the risk for the tankers, we had to make some deals with our soft bubbas, our A-10 bubbas, our fighter bubbas, to help keep the gunners and the shooters' heads down, the missile guys' heads down. And it worked. It took about 48 hours for there to be absolutely no Sapphire events again, when we finally got all of this going. Because the soft guys gave their radio frequencies to the guys that were obviously supporting them. And then there was the A-10 guys had what they called a threat frequency, which was called White 1. And it was a VHF, so everybody could get to it. And that White 1 VHF became the frequency where they would call out things that were firing at the tankers. And like I said, within 48 hours, our Sapphire events dropped to almost nothing. We went from having 7, 14, 16 a night. They'd only do it at night, to 0 in 48 hours, because the guys were getting thumped pretty hard by the hogs and the Strike Eagle. So that's another answer to your question, Craig, about the procedures. We had to create a threat reduction program for the tankers when we moved them into Iraq, and they would come up 2 at a time with 2 rooting around down there with their pods on. And of course, the 16s the Block 40s had lantern targeting pods or lightning pods, depending on if you're a guard, reserve, or an active duty unit. And of course, the Strike Eagles had the lantern pods. Oh no, wait a minute, they're carrying lightning pods, and the 14s were carrying lantern. The Hornets were carrying their FLIR pods, so they could look around and see anything that was going on or anything that was moving. The B1s and the F-15Es have a moving target indicator, or MTI, in their radars, and they could also use those things for rooting around too. And the J-Stars was also in on this, and of course it was looking underneath the tanker tracks to figure out if anything was moving around down there too. Well, we finally came up with a name for this big strip that went across Iraq, where the hogs were rooting around. The CSAR hogs were rooting around trying to find things. And Oatmeal came up with his name. He called it the pig pen. The pig pen under the tanker tracks. And that's how we did it. You know, and the procedures changed because the tactical situation changed, Craig. And we had to do it because we had to figure out how to reduce the risk. And of course, I will tell you too, the Tanker Airlift Control Center at Scott Air Force Base near St. Louis was on the phone with us a lot. The chief of plans at the TACC and the Tanker Airlift Control Center deputy commander, a colonel by the name of Gino Redmond, he had been my squadron commander in Okinawa. John Van Gielder and I started our careers together at P's as young lieutenants, so we'd known each other for a long time. And they would call me and we'd coordinate things and everything. And of course, John saw the new airspace control order when Shania and Rebo opened up, and he goes, "What are you doing here?" We're going into Iraq. On day 4, I'm doing what the CFAC asks. Says, well, how are you going to deal with the risk? I don't know yet, but we're going to deal with it somehow. And these are the plans that we came up over the next, 48 hours or so. And like I said, as we were putting all that together on day 5 and 6, by day 7, 8, and 9, we weren't seeing anything at all. Even in the north guys were starting to do the same thing. The soft guys were up there were shooting javelins like they were going out of style. They loved that thing. And, what's not to love? The Ukrainians are finding out how good it is too. Do not get me on that political soapbox.
I know Whipsaw has told me he's got some questions for you, so I think I'll turn it over to him so he can
Sure.
ask away. He's kind of geeking out and fanboy. He's been reading your book. I think he's finished your book, and I think he's been listening to the podcast as well. So
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you for those words. Hopefully
Absolutely.
you like the book. Hopefully you like the book, and hopefully you've enjoyed the podcast. Wasn't
I have the book. I have the book right here in front of me, actually. Believe it or not. So it's really, really good book. Great read. First and foremost,
send it to me.
Give me if I can get your address. I'll love to send it and get an autograph. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Craig's got it. If not, Craig, I'll send it to you. I don't know if you're on Facebook or not, but
I am.
Are you?
Mm-hmm.
Go find me and send me a message, and I'll send it to you. Because I tell everybody that's got my book, and for those of you that don't, if you get my book, I'll send you my address. And I always put a note in the flyleaf page. It's got the flag and everything on it. I don't just sign the book. I put a nice note to you in it. Okay.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
There are a lot of great stories that you have in this book. What I find fascinating is, even though you being a tanker pilot in the Air Force, have a lot of experience just interacting with the Navy, being able to fly in an S3 Viking as well, and on a cat launch, and on recovery as well. What was that experience like? You're used to flying a KC-135. You have a 2-mile long runways working out of, and then here you are, getting ready to fly down the groove on an S3 Viking.
That's a great question, man. So let me go back to the very first time I did this. During Operation Desert Storm, I was doing planning as well as flying. Really, really pissed off my crew. They were not happy with me. And the matter of fact, they went home and complained that I was not taking care of them because they didn't go out to the aircraft carrier like I did. That was my first trip out the aircraft. Well, the two gentlemen, lieutenant colonels, Dave Wright, D. Wright, that I talk about in the book, and Bruce, Colonel Bruce, were the planners, tanker planners. They were all R model guys that have a lot of A model experience, and they were looking for A model experience. And I said, sure, I'll help you. Well, D. Wright came up to me one day and goes, how would you like to go on an aircraft carrier overnight? I said, is there stink on a skunk? And he says, okay, so this is what we're going to do. And they found somebody to fly with my crew. And I got to go out to the aircraft carrier, John F. Kennedy, and stay overnight. Well, we get on the COD, and of course the COD takes off from Saudi Arabia, and it's like, it's nothing. This is like nothing. It's like being a KC-135. But the loadmaster in the C2 is now saying, okay, get ready. And a pattern for a carrier during the daytime is 800 feet to the right of the carrier, make the break over the carrier, come around, pitch out, and come in and land. And so you really get razzed if you don't do that at like the maximum performance of your airplane, whether it's a Hornet or if it's a C2 COD. So he wrapped it up into like 45 degrees of bank, pulled about 3 Gs coming around, right? Again, we're at 800 feet. But I was sitting by the window because I wanted to see what was happening. We come around the corner, and finally we're all lined up. And the guy is saying, get ready, get ready, get ready. You know, and I don't know what I'm getting ready for, but I know it's going to be epic. And then finally, it's screech, bang, halt. Just like I said in the book, screech, bang, halt. And you go from like 135 knots to nothing in like 200 feet. And I'm like, I look over at D. Wright and I go, I gotta do that again. It was so cool. And of course, you know when you've taken the cable, because I mean there's an instant deceleration. But we taxi up and park ourselves up on the front, and the wings fold and cover the window, so now I can't see anything. But the ramp immediately goes down when he does that. And so now we're looking out the back, because as you know, in the COD, all the chairs face backwards.
Mm-hmm.
They don't change that when you take off. Well, so I'll get to it here in just a second. So we get off, and I just look around, and it's freaking mayhem. This is my first time on a carrier, and I'm thinking to myself, I could walk 20 feet and get killed by something smacking me, all right? Data, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. And so they kind of rope me in and say, okay, you know, follow us. And D. Wright says, if you think that was cool, wait till the cat shot. I go, that must be something cool. So we're there, and we're learning. What had happened was they had changed the opening 3 nights air tasking orders, and we're there doing all the planning for them and getting everything all set up. Well, my escort was a guy who loved taking photos too, and I talk about him in the book, Hey Joe Parsons. Hey Joe shows me all around, treats me good and everything like that. Whenever you're on an aircraft carrier and you're a tanker guy, you know, you're like Bathsheba, all right? Everybody wants to come up and paw on you and talk to you and do all kinds of stuff, all right? Which is fine. But it was an opportunity to learn. And I looked at it as an incredible opportunity to learn. But I couldn't do it in overnight. There was so much to learn. And D. Wright had been going out every week, so his learning curve was huge. Well, the next day, and I think it's in the afternoon, the COD's going back into King 5. And so they don't turn the chairs around. And when the cat shot happens, you're going from 0 to 160 knots and 307 feet. And you come out of the chair. You're down like this, holding everything, and you're going to come out of the chair no matter what. And I remember thinking, Whipsaw, through that whole thing, oh, this is so freaking cool. I mean, it was only 3 seconds, okay, if that. And through that whole thing, I'm thinking, oh, this is so cool. And again, D Wright's on the other side of it, all right? And I turn to him when I hear the gear coming up and the flaps coming up, and I'm going, oh my God. I think I screamed that all the way home. All right. It was such a cool experience to be able to feel that. And remember, all of you, flying is all 5 of your senses, including your sense of smell. And a lot of people don't believe me when I tell them that, but anybody that's been around airplanes for any period of time, there's a certain smell around airplanes, around small airplanes, big airplanes, fast airplanes, slow airplanes. There's a smell to it. You know, hearing, sight, smell, feel, everything. All of those 5 senses are firing at once during a catch shot, Whipsaw.
Wow.
It is the most surreal thing. And believe me, like I said, I've got 10 cats and traps, and all 10 of them, I was screaming the same thing. I gotta do that again. I gotta do that again. Because it's such a thrill, you know. And of course, all the carrier guys are going, yeah, it's a thrill for you, Sluggo, because you can get off the boat, which is fine. But, you know, the cat shot was cool. The trap was cool, Whipsaw. But the education was freaking incredible. Because, like I said, during Desert Storm and Kosovo, Whipsaw, we had no idea what we were doing. We really didn't. And we didn't spend a lot of time doing exercises with the Navy, so we could learn. We would go to Red Flag, we'd do all these other exercises. The Navy would be involved, and it was pretty much, okay, send the tanker right here, keep them there, offload till they can't offload anymore, and send them home. Well, there's got to be better ways to integrate with the Navy. And little did I realize that this TAC memo, now their airstrike and air warfare manual, had everything we needed to know how to do that. But the Air Force just didn't know it was there until I went up to Fallon and went, oh, crap, we're going to teach all our stuff out of that. And I'll tell you something. Our C-130 commandant went, why are you teaching this stuff? And I told him once, I got tired of listening to him. He's an 06, a colonel. I said, come with us. Come with us to San Diego. And I set him up. We got on the Aegis cruiser, and the captain of the cruiser was the battle group air defense belly button, Alpha Whiskey, they call him. And I told him, I said, I need you to corner my colonel and take him somewhere where you can tell him the reason that we are here is because we depend so much on the big wing tankers for any big air campaign, contingencies, or anything that we're involved with. And knowing that there are smart tanker guys about how we are doing business is extremely important. I set him up. We called this Colonel Over G, okay? Because he always overreacted to everything. So he got the nickname Over G. Anyway, so that education that we didn't have for the first 2 wars, Whiplash, versus the second 2 wars over Afghanistan and Iraqi freedom, and subsequently on, it was huge. There was a huge difference in the way we supported. And I'll tell you another story. Again, we're going down, we're setting up the school, and the USS Constellation is having what's called their Comp 2X. It's like their final test before they go off to cruise. And we are sitting with the battle group admiral, and we're telling him, sir, can we make some suggestions? He goes, by all means. Please think of yourself as part of my staff. I said, okay. You've got all of the tankers back here behind the aircraft carrier. Move them all up here in front of the cruiser. And everybody in the room went, wait, what? You guys can like get shot at out there. I said, no, here's why. All right. You've got the 2 Aegis cruisers out here in front of carrier. Put us in front of them so that we are closer to the target area that all these guys are bombing, particularly the Hornets. And if something happens and somebody comes after us, retrograde us behind the cruisers so that the two cruisers have a clear field of fire and we're out of the way. And the Hornets or the Tomcats have a clear field of fire also. They don't have to worry about the tankers, but they know that we will be close in case they need more gas. And he went, that's freaking brilliant, Sluggo. Why didn't I think of that? And I said, sir, we've got to think of better ways to integrate the tanker, the big wing tankers into your battle group. And believe me, we've been thinking about this problem for a long time. And now we finally have a school that's going to teach this and fix this problem for you guys. Well, sure enough, he puts the tanker like forward of the Aegis cruisers, but centered between the two of them with about a 80,000 pound give, which made the Hornet guys just pleased, so happy. And sure enough, the bad guys are like going, oh, look, there's a big fat tanker here. Well, they used it as bait because they thought, oh, here's the tanker. And so all of a sudden they're like reacting to the tanker being out forward, and they got thrashed when they tried to tap the tanker. Okay. And the Aegis cruiser, we talked to him. We said, okay, if somebody comes up and starts, coming on us, just put us back behind you. Just tell us to slide or scram behind you and get like 30 miles behind you so you guys can shoot. And that's exactly what happened. And sure enough, man, it worked. It worked really good. And then when that threat was gone, they moved us back up there, and the Hornet guys were cycling on and off, and we're only having to go like 50 miles, I think, to their target area, which just made them pleased as punch because they're dropping bombs, doing all these kinds of crazy things. And now gas is not an issue because the tanker is so close. That didn't happen until our school was created, and we actually got to sit down with a Navy admiral and say, this is where you need to put us. Well, it came time for us to leave, and the battle group admiral looked at the three of us from the KC-135 weapons school cadre. He goes, which one of you is coming with me? One of you is coming with me to the Gulf. I don't care which one. Figure out which one. I said, sir, we're a little busy doing what we need to do. He goes, I know that. But having you guys on board and now showing me not only the capabilities, but what I can do with you guys and moving you around was huge for us. And sure enough, the USS Constellation Battle Group got into the Gulf, and guess what they made the tankers do? Come up in front of us, we'll take care of it. The Aegis cruisers are right here. They can handle any air threats. They can handle any surface threats, all those kinds of things. And so we started that ball rolling so that when the time to do Afghanistan, they had better ways of integrating us in there. So the cat shot and the trap were an experience that you never forget. Absolutely never forget. I look back on the 10 of those things as one of the great moments in my career. But being on board the carrier whipsaw and being able to talk to these guys and learn from them and get educated from them was absolutely one of the best educations I got during my military career. Because I had valuable knowledge that allowed me to reduce risk in so many ways because of the time that I spent aboard ship on the cruisers, destroyers, and the AOC float ship. Really good question. You can't describe it. It's hard to describe to somebody that's never done it, because it's like the only thing that I can think of that comes close to it, whipsaw, is those roller coasters that you're like going up, and all of a sudden it's just bang and off you go. That's what it's like. That's what the cat shot's like. I mean, it's just incredible. 0 to 160 knots and 307 feet. Just a little over 80 yards. That's what they call it, the 80-yard dash. And the S3, we were loaded pretty heavy. We were loaded to the gills with gas. So in the COD, they have the gas, to get to its next location and about 15% more. In the S3, we were loaded down pretty heavy. And that one was a ball buster. That one hurt, And of course, we're in the Indian Ocean, where it's hot, humid. It's April, So that cat shot was pretty hardcore. The COD one's not so bad, but the S3 cat shot fully loaded, and you can imagine what a Hornet or a Tomcat or a Prowler loaded to the gills, weapons, fuel, everything. That's going to be a pretty hard cat shot too. Good question.
Good answer. I really do appreciate the answer. Bones,
No
if you may, I have one more question. I do like the idea in being able to solve problems with unique, or to be able to solve unique problems with unique answers and things of that nature. The one I found very unique in your book as well was, how do we get fuel to an airbase that's low on fuel, in regards to utilizing C-17 and the bladders and things of that. So can you talk a little bit more about that? The idea
Sure.
of the fuel elevator.
I'll tell you the whole story.
We came up with that.
I'll tell you the whole story we came up with that. What he's talking about is the chapter in my book called Fuel Elevator. Operation Anaconda, for those of you that haven't listened to my podcast, I do a 6-part series on Operation Anaconda, and I actually talked to the 2 helo pilots of Razor 3 and Razor 1 that got shot down on top of Taggart Mountain. Well, because of the dynamic changes to Operation Anaconda, they required a lot more gas. The helicopters got all shot up. The Apaches got all shot up. They brought in new ones. But now the Chinooks and everything are having to fly these medevac missions, and they're flying more. And Bagram was running out of gas. And so my boss at that time period was, God, I can picture his face, can't remember his name. His great-great-grandfather was the hero of like 1812. His great-grandfather fought in the Civil War, and there's 4 generations of generals in his family. He retired as a 3-star. Oh, what was his name? Anyway, he came up to me and he goes, "Sluggo, I'm a C-130 guy. I do not know your business. I need help with this. Bagram's running out of gas." And he's standing talking to me. Skip Scott of the famous Winfield Scotts. That's what it was. As a matter of fact, he's like Winfield Scott the 4th or something like that. Anyway, he's asking me, how are we going to get stuff into Bagram? And I'm like going, he says, "I know this is a bad idea." He's holding up an email from the TACC at Scott Air Force Base, on the other side of the world. And he goes, "How are we going to do this?" And I go, "Well, sir, we can't do it by KC-10, biggest airplane on the ramp, other than the C-5. Can't land that at Kandahar. Can't land that at Bagram. Can't, all this stuff." And I start going through all these things, Believe it or not, I think in the whole country of Afghanistan, there's like 25 fuel trucks. Only 25. So that's not going to work, because those fuel trucks are going to have to go through Al-Qaeda/Taliban held areas. So that's not going to work. And so he says, "Those are all great. Can you write those all down for me so I can send them back to General Handy? And you got to figure out how we're going to do this." Well, there was a C-130 guy there who was also a member of the weapons school, the C-130 weapons school grad. And we're sitting there, we're looking at each other. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And Rocco looks up at me and goes, "Sluggo, I know how we're going to do it. We're going to do a fuel elevator." And I go, "Okay, sounds good. Let's talk about it." And he goes, "Where can you put an air fueling anchor area near Bagram?" I says, "Well, I don't know. I'll have to go talk to the airspace guys, but I'm sure I could put one fairly close." He said, "What we'll do is we'll take a C-17 full of bladders, have it go down there, and then when they got the bladders all rolled out, and the pumps all hooked up to them will pump the gas off of the C-17 and get it to its like lowest minimal takeoff weight. We'll send it up to the tanker that's near Bagram, fill it back up with 80,000 pounds because that'll still maintain its landing weight. Send it back down, offload that gas, come back up to you, and then get the gas that needs to go home. And we'll just keep this daisy chained and going until they say, King's X, we don't need any more. I said, that's a great idea. Never been done before. And so we go brief this, Rocco and I, to Skip Scott, and he, being a C-130 guy, goes, this is fabulous. And he's the director of mobility forces. He goes into Mosley and his boss and goes, this is how we're going to do this. And they're like, okay. And it works fabulously. First C-17 comes in. The fuel bladders are at the back. They come out. They roll those bad boys out, hook everything up to them. And it only took them like 20 minutes. It didn't take them very long. And then they hook a hose right up to the C-17 refuel, defuel port and start pumping gas out. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, JP4 or JP5, and I've come to find out the Army can switch up the fuel with the change of a dial or something like that. I'm not smart on the Humvees or anything like that, but they can use whatever gas they've got, which I thought was pretty cool. Kerosene, okay, perfect. Well, that C-17 develops an APU problem, and it can't get off the runway because it can't start its engines. And General Corley, who is down there, get that thing out of here. Well, he can't. So the second airplane that comes in brings a power unit, ground power unit, a huffer, and that's how they start that thing. So they actually have two C-17s taking up a lot of space on the ramp. And he's not happy with this at all. But that huffer, they hook it up to the airplane, get the engines running, disconnect it, roll it up into the back of the C-17, and off they both go. Well, we kept this going for like 2 days. And again, this had never been done before. And TACC is going, wait a minute, what are you guys doing? How are you guys doing this? And so we actually wrote this thing down. We said, look, we just learned something here. You know, if someplace needs gas, we just put a tanker overhead and send a C-17 up and down to fill up the bladders. And they wrote all that stuff down. They goes, holy smokes, that's fantastic. We got to keep that in the back pocket and remember that. So finally, the Army goes, oh, make it stop, make it stop, make it stop. And I think it was like 48 hours later, those bladders are full to the gills. I mean, it looks like just a big freaking waterbed. And then they say, okay, you know, that's enough. And then they call it off. Well, later on, the Army comes back to us and says, I don't know who thought of that idea, but whoever did deserves a medal, because that helped us out big time. Because we didn't know what the gas bill was going to be at Bagram. And oh, by the way, after Anaconda settled down, the A-10 Hogs moved in there too from Pakistan. So now they had more users of gas off of those bladders. So by doing that, we actually kind of moved everything, you know, we kind of moved the force forward, because now we had enough gas for when the Hogs moved in there, where they can fly their missions, you know, right off the bladders. And of course, the Hogs do what's called hot pit refueling, where they hook the hose up to the wheel well, the nose of the wheel well, and pump gas in it that way. And it was easy just to, you know, pull up to one of the bladders, you know, make sure all the switches are safe and everything like that, hook that thing up and pump gas into it while the engines are still running. And then they would go to rearm them, and then they'd be ready to go again. Worked perfect. But that's how that came about. It was just, we had to solve another problem. And that problem was we could not take the risk of putting a KC-10 on a ramp in Afghanistan because we knew when some Taliban Al Qaeda guy saw this great big huge airplane on a ramp that it was going to eat a mortar round. We knew it. We knew the airfields were probably not really good and swept. We had no idea what the weight bearing capacity of the taxiways or the runways were. None of that. And so I'm not going to send a KC-10 in there. And then we found out that the KC-10 could only give about 60,000 pounds. We would have to truck it to Bagram. And like I said, there's only 25 trucks and they're driving right through the middle of bad guy territory. So crisis was the mother invention. And we came up with that fuel elevator tactic. And sure enough, they still use it. It got written down in the C-17 and C-130 tactics manual, and we still use it. We still use it. You know, they'll go into these austere places. You know, and they've actually done it from a 135 now too. At a 135 land. I don't know if you guys know this. We had a weapons school graduate. His paper was on hot pit refueling for KC-135s. Which had never been done before, never practiced before, nobody even thought of it. And he said, here's the procedures, here's the checklist for it, came up with the whole idea for it. And now, the KC-135s, hot pit refuel, they shut 3 engines down, keep 1 running, and they hook the hoses up in the wheel well and start pumping gas into it. Great question, Whiplash. Great story too. Like I said, you know, Rocco came up with the idea. I just had to figure out how to keep the C-17s refueled. So, you know, they would come in, land, offload gas, come up to the tanker, get some more gas, go down, offload gas, come back up to the tanker, and go home. And then the next one would be on its way in. And like I said, I think that went for about 48 hours. So that was about, I think we did like 10 missions, maybe 10 of those kinds of missions, and filled those things up. Those bladders hold 380,000 gallons each. I know. I said the same thing, Dad. I went, what?
That's a big waterbed.
That's a big waterbed, man. A big flammable waterbed.
Were the bladders protected from incoming fire somehow?
No, because you can't. We had berms and everything around them to protect them from blowing up and everything. But fever, we couldn't figure out a way to, you know, there's no way you can keep a mortar round from dropping on top of it. I'm not sure exactly where they put them on Bagram, but they were kind of out in the open. You know, because there's nothing that's going to keep a mortar round from dropping on top of them. You know, you can put nets and all kinds of things on top, over the top of it, but I just don't think that's going to happen.
It's less costly to lose a pile of gas than a plane, though.
Oh, absolutely, Fever. You're absolutely right. Okay. So, you know, you can imagine the conflagration of 380,000 gallons was probably pretty spectacular, but nothing happened to them. And like I said, once the hogs showed up there, Fever, more airplanes started coming in. They figured, okay, well, if the hogs can come in here, we can do 16s. Excuse me. We can do 16s. We can do Strike Eagles. You know, we can start doing all these other airplanes, and they did. So, hey, I need to take about a 3-minute biological break. And then I'll be right back. Those of you that want to do in kind, please help yourself. I'll be right back. Take another sip.
Oh man.
I wonder if any of the tankers got hit during those operations from the science projects. That was one question I was going to ask.
No. To my knowledge, nothing. No tankers ever got hit by anything. It's definitely not mentioned in his book.
I never knew that Saddam just had like miscellaneous crap they was shooting at him. I'm kind of interested just to learn what he all had going out there.
Sounds like you'd have to sift through some wreckage to figure it out, though. Get all taken out, whatever it was.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah, and you can imagine fever, these things laid out like that, you know, big, massive waterbed, you know.
It's an inviting target for sure.
Oh, yeah, it really is, you know, but we had to do it. And they were just out of gas, you know, and we were like going, holy smokes, how are we going to do this? And Rocco goes, I know, airmail, fuel elevator. Just blurted it out.
I was thinking those things eventually got hit when they that attack that happened that killed the CO of the Harrier Squadron.
Yeah. There was a number of things. People have asked me, you know, we left there, we did all this and did all this work and everything. Then we left there abruptly, left all this stuff behind, yada, yada, yada. And people always ask me, you know, what was our biggest mistake? And our biggest mistake was we did not have a solid strategy for being there, staying there, and coming out. I understand that's where bin Laden was operating from. But there were times where we didn't have the political will to, you know, make him assume cave temperature. We had him several times. And it was like we had to call back to Tampa or Washington, D.C. to get permission to drop on him. During Operation Anaconda, I've actually heard a recording of his voice. So you have this like 6'4", 6'5" guy. And he's got kind of this high-pitched voice, which you just don't expect from a tall guy. A gal that worked in the CIA that was there in the CAC played it for me one day. And they got it off of one of his Iridium phones. But there were numerous occasions where we were pretty sure, okay, it's him in the truck. And we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited. And nothing ever happened. I'll tell you one story in particular. And I think I cover this a little bit in the book, but I'm not sure. My good friend Moose Lakaitis, who was the DCAG on Roosevelt during OIF, was one of the deputy directors in the CAOC during Anaconda. And we saw these two trucks leave with a bearded guy in white robes and his like Praetorian guard dressed like they normally are, get in the trucks with him. And we thought, here he goes. And we couldn't get permission to drop on him. So Moose goes, okay, I can't hit him, but I can hit things around him. And there happened to be a B-1 from Thumb Rate Oman that was there, and he had them target both sides of the valley and this pass they were going through, because it's made out of shale. All this stuff is made out of shale. And so they dropped two bombs that just collapsed all of the shale, the sides of the mountains, into the passageway they were trying to get out, and closed it off. And I remember on the Predator video, you see the two trucks go, and then head out the other way. Well, now one's become two, two's become one, and they split up. And now the Chinook with the Rapid Reaction Force is on its way too into the wherever they're at. Well, they split up, and the one that we thought had bin Laden in it and his entourage went one way, and the other one went another way. And then all of a sudden they stopped. We're like, wait a minute, they got to know we're watching them. What are they doing? And three guys get out and start heading up to the top of of the hills, and we realize they're lost. They know where they're at. And that's when an F-18 comes in, drops a GBU-12 that hits about 3 feet from the right rear axle, endos that truck like crazy. And all these bodies are spilling out of it and stuff spilling out of them. There's Datsun King Cab trucks all over the Middle East. That's what this was. And the three guys come running back down, and the Chinook shows up when they're like taking whatever it is off the guy that was in the front passenger seat. And we think it's him. Later find out it's not. And, you know, it's probably some kind of decoy or something like that. And bin Laden slips out, as you know. But again, we couldn't get permission to drop until like an hour and a half later. So Moose, in his infinite wisdom, to try and slow this process down as we're waiting for permission, just cuts the pass off by dropping two 2,000-pound bombs, one on one side, one on the other, and just brings the sides of the mountain down like an avalanche. And he doesn't get in trouble for that. Stutz, the J3, you know, just says good thinking, because we're all on the same page. If this is him, why can't we get permission? So there was a really cumbersome approval process for a lot of this until, you know, finally the SEAL Team 6 guys go in there, you know, Rob O'Neill and his buds, and take him out. And those of you who have watched Rob O'Neill talk, you all know they didn't think they were coming home. They thought that was a one-way trip in a real fancy helicopter. Two real fancy helicopters. So there was no really defined strategy, and as part of that strategy is, why are we there? Why are we going in there? Why are we staying there? How are we going to get out? What does Afghanistan look like when we're done here? And that wasn't very clearly defined. And a really good friend of mine, one of the guys that worked for me during OIF, Wayno, I talk about him in the book, Wayno. He was the North Mapper. Wayne McCaskill is his name. He went over there later and was part of the cadre that was trying to teach the Afghanis how to fly. And I remember talking to him on the phone. He goes, Sluggo, it was like trying to teach kindergartners how to fly once they understood the language. He said we had a language barrier, and a lot of these people don't have any concept of manned flight. They've never been around that. You know, they've been goat herders and shepherds all their lives. And now here we are trying to teach them how to operate a tactical airplane. And it was difficult, you know. And so that was another part of this strategy where you went, why? You know, what are they going to do with the airplanes? I have no idea what they're going to do with the airplanes now. Now that we've left all that stuff there, I just don't know. But I think we went in there. This is just my feelings, guys. One guy's opinion. We went in there for the right reasons. I don't think we understood why we were going there and how we were going to get out. Because the one thing that you always hear from the State Department is, what will this place look like when we leave it? What is this country's concept of a free republic and democracy? And how many people in Afghanistan understand those concepts? Very few. Very few. It was the same way in Iraq. I don't know if you guys know this, but there was a huge amount of research done on what Iraq should look like after we got rid of Saddam. And it was based on, the reconstruction was based on the reconstruction of Germany and Japan, based on those two plans that MacArthur and Maxwell put into place once World War II was over. And those were extremely detailed plans, and they had the military had actually gone into academia and asked them, how do we do this? They had the strategy down, the tasks down, everything. Monetary system, okay? Here's the 4 things that we use in the military. It's called the elements of national power, right? DIME is the acronym: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. Are they strong or weak diplomatically, strong or weak informationally, strong or weak militarily, strong or weak economically? Can we make them stronger in those areas, or will they become weaker in those areas? Conrad Crane at the U.S. Army school, their colonel school, had all this figured out in a nice, neat little binder, which nobody came to get. Nobody. And Conrad Crane went around going, look, Operation Blacklist was the name for the one in Japan, reconstructed in Japan. And then I can't remember what Germany was called. But they had actually gone to academia, got college support for all of this, knew from the brightest minds how to make them, Germany and Japan, stronger diplomatically, informationally, militarily, to a point, and economically. Had it all worked out based on experience, based on cultures, because Japan and Germany have completely different cultures. And obviously so does Middle Eastern Iraq, with Saddam and his sons gone. Nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to talk to him. He showed it to me. Matter of fact, I think I've got a copy of it somewhere. He wrote a subsequent paper that had everything in it. Everything. All the tasks, all the things, you know. Here's this task, here's the things you have to do. Here's this task, here's the things you have to do. It's based on this strategy. And you have to look at what was Iraq supposed to look like diplomatically, informationally, militarily, and economically when we left. Well, obviously oil was a big part of the economics. What would the military look like? Well, you make it so he can't go offensive. Well, you're in a kind of a crazy neighborhood, right? You got Iranians on one side that are Muslims of a different ideology, and you've got Muslims in your country who are of a different ideology, Sunni versus Shia. And believe it or not, Iraq is the melting pot of both of them. How are you going to make those folks cooperate together when there's some bad blood between them, based on who was supposed to take over after Muhammad left? What do you leave with them militarily? Informationally, how strong do you make them? How strong do you make them diplomatically? And how do you do that when everything went through Saddam? And if Saddam didn't like what you were trying to do, chances were you would end up dead the next day, or your family was dead with you. In many cases that we later found out. So there was a plan for that we never implemented as part of, okay, now we freed Iraq, now what? Well, some people already had the now what done based on historical studies, Japan and Germany. Now you just got to add to it that they're very focused in their life and culture on their religion, and you could pretty much take off with that. Nobody wanted to hear it. And look where that got us, you know. An insurgency that was run by some of his generals, because he had money everywhere. Guys were finding gold and cash everywhere, particularly in some of these trailers. Maybe you guys have seen this picture of like these 2 or 3 privates that found this trailer out in the middle of nowhere, tractor trailer, like a Walmart trailer in some corner of some village. And it had like $32 million in cash and gold in it. Dinars, USD, gold bars, stashed all over it.
So the movie
Yeah.
Three Kings was pretty on point then, with Clooney.
Fever, I haven't seen the movie, but probably so. Again, what is the strategy? What is Iraq, Afghanistan? And think about this too. If we ever go into North Korea, what does North Korea look like diplomatically, informationally, militarily, and economically when we leave? For a country that has been run by basically a mafia clan for 50, 60, 70 years? And what are those strategies and tasks? Well, we've got something to kind of base it on because we did this whole study on Japan and reconstructing it. But how do you go into a country and rebuild it where you have whole provinces that don't have running water and electricity? You all have seen the night space photograph of South Korea versus North Korea. And Pyongyang is just a little dim dot. With South Korea, you can tell exactly where the DMZ is because everything south of that is lit up like crazy. So when you hear us, talking about, well, what are we going to do in North Korea? What are we going to do with the Chinese? What's the strategy with the Chinese? They just built these huge, big bases on sand that they dredged up in the South China Sea. Do you know how much commerce goes through the South China Sea in a year? Any of you ever heard a number? I know what it is when I was teaching. $2.5 trillion worth of commerce goes through the South China Sea. Not only on the ocean, but in the air. And believe it or not, you can do a really, really good intel search on Google Earth. Because did you know that you can slide the little ruler back over time and see things? It's amazing. And believe it or not, there is one of the islands, I can't remember which one, that has this massive air base on it, and it has alert barns at both ends of the runway. And one particular day, some satellite caught one of the Chinese flankers doing an engine run on an edge of the pad. And then on another island, on another day, they caught them towing a flanker into one of these alert hangars and closed it up. It's right there. And they told us, well, this is beach resort and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, for flanker pilots. But again, we're hearing a lot of this. We're going to war with China, going to war. Have all of you read the letter that General Mike Minahan sent out about, I hope I'm wrong, but my gut tells me we're going to be at war probably with China by 2025? Go read that letter. Mike Minahan, it's his letter to his wing commanders. And he's pretty direct about what he says. He told says, all of you that have pistol training, pistol qual, I want you to go fire one clip at a 7-meter target, aim for the head. He's pretty blunt about it. And that's kind of the way he is. I've met him. He's kind of a warrior's warrior. He's a C-130 guy. But guess what? He grew up in the Pacific. He understands China and the Pacific very well. Somebody asked me the other day, well, what do you think of all this stuff where Iran is dropping drones on our guys? And I got to be honest with you, I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know how that's going to escalate, if it does escalate. I don't know how things are going to escalate in Ukraine and Russia. I don't know if you heard, but the Ukrainians dropped their first JDAMs this week. They got JDAMs somehow in one of these deals. How many of you know that their MiG-29s are fire and harm? High-speed anti-radiation missiles. They actually rewired, did all the computer work, and made an adapter so that MiG-29s can carry arms. There's actually a really good video out there on one of the Russian TV channels, and you can tell it's a harm shot on the radar because of the circular explosion of the warhead from the harm around the radar. The harm's really accurate now that it's got GPS, and these are block 4 or 5, I think now, really, really accurate. I mean, we're talking less than 2 meters. And this thing came in and schwacked this radar, and you can tell it was a harm because of the pattern of the warhead, but they also found harm parts around it and gathered all the harm parts up, put them in a pile, and took a picture of it and sent it out. So there's some pretty, we live in a pretty crazy world right now, guys, where we have to ask ourselves some serious questions about what are these places supposed to look like if we go to war with them. And of course, you know, a lot of people are talking World War III and the ultimate war and what that would look like. And I used to be on Strategic Air Command Alert with 6 FB-111s carrying 4 nuclear weapons each. And there were some pretty scary times back then. So ask yourself these questions: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. Whenever you see a newscast or something, you're looking at something where Ukraine, Russia, China, whatever, you know, go through those 4 things: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. Because it will give you a better look at, and what do they always say? Follow the money. You know, follow the money. Where's the money coming from, and where's it going to?
You know,
I personally don't like seeing all this money going over to Ukraine because we've got plenty of problems here. And I wish that more vets were not in the situation that they were in. Why do we have homeless vets? Why would any administration allow that? I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. I tell you, if I ever become president, that's one of the first things I'm doing, taking care of the vets first. And a new law that I will pass as president: if you go into the military and you stay longer than 12 or 15 years, your income is tax-free forever. You've paid your price and your debt to society and to the Americans, you know, by staying in the military, being a part of the military. You know, I say years, 12 or 15, I don't know. You know, anybody that has the balls, has the moxie now to go into the military, I applaud them, because there's a very uncertain future for the military right now. And I'm not saying this as a Republican or a Democrat. I'm saying this as an independent, and I've been an independent for a long time, that our country needs to take care of its vets much better than it has been. Many of you are vets, you know what I'm talking about. Many of you have been to VA hospitals, and I'll be honest with you. I went to a VA hospital. I said, I'll never come here again. Never. Because of the things that I was being asked, you know, the things that they were implying. It was left a really bad taste in my mouth. And I didn't go back to a VA hospital for about 7 years. I was getting all this mail. I was getting all these emails, you know, and phone calls. Where are you? Are you still alive? You know, we haven't seen you for a long time. But finally, I went back because, believe it or not, Salt Lake has got a fairly decent VA hospital, and they treat you right. That's one of the things I noticed as soon as I walked in the building, that these guys were going to take care of the vets a lot better than the previous place I was. Okay, now I will step off the political soapbox. What are the questions you have for me, guys? I'm here as long as you're here.
So I got here's a question for you.
Yes, sir.
When it comes to pilots on the tanker, how many times have you sat in that tanker and go, this guy's never getting plugged in, ever?
You know what? There has been a couple times where I've experienced that. And you know what, Warhawk? It's just like every pilot has a good day, every pilot has a bad day. I put 2 G's on the G meter when I landed a KC-135 once. I hit the runway so hard we bounced 30 feet back in the air. I was having a bad day.
I'll bet your ground crew loved you for that one.
The struts were bleeding when we went around outside downwind. I left the gear down because, you know, if you have a hard landing, it says leave the gear down, don't touch it. And the struts were bleeding. The seals had popped. Okay. I did everything that I was supposed to, though. The issue in Okinawa was coming back from a typhoon evac. And you have to remember, typhoons in the Pacific are monstrous. 190 mile an hour, 160, 190 mile an hour winds was pretty common. And when I came in to land, the tower had called the crosswind in limits when it wasn't. And what happened was a big gust of wind took all the lift out from underneath the wings when I had the airplane about 30 feet in the air and was rounding out. And we just came down hard. And of course, as luck would have it, I have the chief of KC-130 standardization and evaluation check pilot sitting in this seat right behind me. But all of you have been in an elevator that's going down and have felt you get light in your feet, okay? And as soon as I pulled the power back, I felt the airplane start dropping. I immediately pickle power speed brakes. That's the go around checklist for a KC-135. Pickle, meaning the flight director now goes to 8 degrees nose up command. Power, up to go around power, and you check to make sure you got your speed brakes down. And then when you're in the air, you go flaps 50 to 30 when you start moving away, because that's what we call the best lift over drag max for the wing is 30-degree flaps. So I went pickle, power, speed brakes, flaps to 30, and the airplane just went, ugh. And I'm like, go baby, go baby. But we're being pushed sideways over the grass, over the barrier, the cable house, and starting to go over the top of the ramp and the Navy ramp. And finally the engines catch and we finally start going around. But, you know, they say hold the landing attitude, all that kind of stuff. And the Sandoval pilot, the Czech pilot, her name was Jeannie, said you did everything exactly the way you're supposed to. You know, because with her in the seat, she can bust you at any time if you do something stupid. But she says, no, you did everything exactly right. I wasn't going to bring the gear up. We checked through the sighting windows. We could see hydraulic fluid going down the struts. And so we called in and said, hey, we had a hard landing. We got 2 G's on the G meter. You know, we're all fine with the gears down, but this airplane's code 3. It can't fly again. And sure enough, they had to go in, change the seals, you know, do the dummy retract where they jack the plane up and gear goes down, up and down, up and down, up and down, check everything out, you know, to make sure that all the clearances are right and everything like that. And of course, the chief of, you know, Chief Master Sergeant Windsor-Lane came up and said, so you're the one that dropped the airplane on the runway, huh? You know, because everybody heard about it. Yeah, I'm that guy. But, you know, everybody has a bad day. And we were teaching the Belgians, Warhawk, how to refuel at night. We had like 4 emergency separations with the Belgians that night on a Monday night because they were too aggressive, you know, charging the boom, doing all kinds of stuff, you know. It was just crazy. And that first night, I think maybe 1 out of the 14 that we refueled actually got on the boom for any period of time. They were flying in 2-seaters, so they had a Han Air Base 50th fighter wing guy in the back seat with them in the front, teach them how to do it. But that first night was ugly, and it was because they'd never refueled on a KC-135 at night. They were learning how to do it, but very few of them got on. By Friday night, they were doing pretty good. But yeah, like I said, Warhawk Moose Lakaitis talked about, you know, the scariest thing I was doing, even scarier than coming back aboard the boat, was refueling off a KC-135 at 30,000 feet, trying to find him on nogs through the clouds. It happens. It happens. And every pilot has had some kind of an emergency where you're thinking to yourself, you know, I may not make it back from this. I've had one. Had a fire under the floor. I talked about it in one of my episodes. We didn't know we were on fire. And it was, the bleed duct was blowing hot air on the elevator cables and the forward body fuel tank at the same time. You just get into some situations where, and there's 3 words every pilot knows: aviate, navigate, communicate. In every emergency, aviate, navigate, communicate. Fly the jet first. Where are you going to go? We're going to set this thing down. Tell them how you're going to get back. And you just deal with it. I didn't think we were going to make it home. Matter of fact, I told my co-pilot, squawk 700 push ident right now, so at least they know where to start looking for the body parts. We were 210 miles west of Honolulu, out over the ocean, when we found out the problem. And we found the problem because the crew chief saw the paint bubbling on the wood floor. It was burning through the wood floor. 1,400 degree air and was blowing out of the bleed duct underneath the floor and started the wood floor on fire. We had 18,000 pounds in the forward body tank, and the elevator cables for the co-pilot and pilot run both sides of the bleed duct. And that hot air, there was 2 holes on both sides, one on each side, and that hot air was blowing on the elevator cables. That's pretty scary. But we got back. We made it back. Most people, except for, you know, people that are going through initial training Warhawk, it's just new to them. And it comes with experience. You know, your first or second air refueling ride is probably going to be ugly. Like your first or second landing, your first or second takeoff, they're going to be ugly. But after a while, with experience, you know, you get on the boom. You know,
So-
you can't leave training without having that square filled, but you know.
So what I'm hearing, Bones, is if I still have a chance.
Oh, you always have a chance. Are you having a little difficulty with this in the game?
Let's just say that we all try to keep a distance of at least half a mile when he's going up.
I tell you what, Warhawk, there's going to come a point in time where you're going to jump right on. It'll be a piece of cake, and you're going to be the guy barrel rolling over the tanker. Okay?
Probably. That would be about my speed.
Well, like I said, Warhawk, it just comes with time and experience. How many times have you refueled?
0.
Attempted refuel? Huh?
Oh, attempted? I stopped counting after I think about 200.
It'll come with time. You'll figure it out.
Flight stick. Here we go.
Yeah, everybody figures it out. Yeah, so maybe you need 210. It'll be okay. Like I said, you'll pull right up, get plugged right in, and then you'll have plenty of gas to do a barrel roll or 2 around the tank.
You heard that, Whipsaw, right? Aviate. Always first. Aviate.
Aviate, navigate, communicate. Every pilot is taught that in pilot training. I don't care if you're flying gliders, helicopters, or big 777s. I can walk up to any pilot right now and go aviate, and they'll finish it. Navigate, communicate.
I say that because we had an incident with him, and he's definitely one of our better pilots in the squadron. And he was coming around the downwind at the carrier, and had an issue with comms. That's what it was. Issue with comms. So he's trying to fix his comms, and then went in a drink.
Behind the boat is not a place to be playing with the radio.
Yeah, it was that, and then my my VR headset froze, and I was trying to fix that, and it was just at the worst possible moment, and that's when things happen. Murphy's Law, and then Murphy's Law of armed combat.
Yeah,
And
you can't go wrong at will.
every single time. But I like to aviate, navigate, communicate. Every pilot learns that. But I think you talked in one of your podcasts the 5 rules that you learned as well.
Oh, I wish I could find that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could find that guy. Marcus Carlton. He was incredible. Yeah, the 5 rules of flying. If those of you who haven't heard the podcast, okay, the 5 rules of flying. Rule number 1, fly the jet. Rule number 2, trim is like breathing. Rule number 3, radio instruments are your friend. Rule number 4, radio calls do not generate lift. And rule number 5, above all else, sound cool on the radio. Those were his five rules of flying. And for those of you that listened to the podcast, he had these on a board behind him, and he just pointed one. Okay, which one of these did you violate on this trip, on this mission, on this training story? And most of the time it was, fly the jet. But every once in a while, we are communicating people. We like to communicate. And every once in a while, we called it porky pigging on the radio. And you just start blabbing, right? When you use like 12 words when 3 words would have worked just fine. And he'd always say, radio calls do not generate that. Radio calls do not generate that. But you know what? Every one of his students, and there's a lot of them I still know and are still friends with, they can spout those things off in a heartbeat. Those 5 rules of flying. Because we all went on for long careers. One of my best friends who flew with Marcus Carlton flew for Atlas Air for a long time. He can still spout them off. I mean, he was just a really, really good instructor. Came from B-52s. Was my T-38 instructor. We called him the doctor because if anybody was having trouble, he could fix them if they were fixable. There's a lot of people that went through pilot training that weren't fixable, that just didn't belong in airplanes, right? Or needed more time, and the Air Force wasn't going to give them more time to learn how to fly. And I was one of those guys that needed more time. Fortunately, I got to stay in and finish and fly KC-135s. And I'd want to fly 707s since I was a kid. But I finished like last in my class, but I finished. And there was a lot of people around me that didn't make it during a time period where we were training people like crazy. And I got to go fly 707s and KC-135s and just had a great career, unusual career, a fantastic career. But through my entire career, I remember when I became an instructor pilot, I used those 5 rules of flying, whipsaw, and everybody go, where did you get those? Marcus Carlton. He went from Vance back into the bomber world and was really instrumental in the B-2 world doing stuff. I wish I could find him. I wish I could find him to tell him I made it, brother. Not only did I make it, I got to do some pretty unusual things like this and this and this.
I'm sorry, what was that gentleman's name?
Marcus Carlton. M-A-R-C-U-S. C-A-R-L-E-T-O-N.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to take that name down because there's a guy in our church. I think his first name is Marcus. He's a former B-52 pilot.
You've got to be kidding me, Roger.
No, I wish I wasn't. Excuse me, I wish I was.
Where are you?
But Marcus, sorry, M-A-R-C-U-S.
Yeah, Marcus Carlton. C-A-R. He's kind of a redheaded dude, if I remember right.
I've only met him once because he's on the older generation of our congregation.
Probably
He
not
would be.
redheaded now.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not now. If he's got hair, you know.
Yeah.
If he's got hair. Roger, where are you?
I'm based in South Carolina.
He was a Southern guy too.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where he served, but I know he was at one point he was a pilot for the B-52. I don't remember exactly what years and where physically he flew out of, but I will follow up and see if this is the gentleman.
If you find him, and if it's him, my email is my name, mark@markhasara.com. All right.
Okay.
My call sign was Sluggo, and he'll know that. You taught a guy that had a lot of difficulty getting through pilot training, that remembers your 5 rules of flying, and if his face lights up at 5 rules of flying, it's him.
Okay.
I would really love to get in touch with him if it's him.
I'm not going to make any promises because I don't know him, like I said, well enough.
No, and that's fine because I've looked all over. Because he went from B-52s, I think he went back to B-52s, but ended up going into the B-2 program. I saw him much later when he was a major at an AFA convention, and we talked for a long time. And I think he was in the B-2 program and doing some other stuff, but I have been trying to find him for years. Matter of fact, a lot of his students, this other guy that flies with Atlas, he and I have been searching all over for him. And if this is him, dude, we owe you beer. Because seriously, Roger, we've been looking all over for this guy, Marcus Carlton.
I will definitely ask and let you know.
Yeah, if you see him tomorrow at church, and it's him, tell him, hey, I talked to one of your students that remembered your 5 rules of flying, had a tough time getting through pilot training, talks a lot about you. The doctor, we called him the doctor. If you go up to him and say, are you the T-38 instructor they call the doctor with the 5 rules of flying, and his face lights up, it's him.
Okay. Cool.
The doctor. Yeah, boy, Roger, if that's him, give him my email address because I really, really want to get a hold of him.
All right, I've got the notes taken down.
I never forgot those things, and we never forgot who he was and how he was a fantastic instructor. But man, he worked hard when it was time to work hard, but he played hard when it was time to play hard. I had a picture of him once with a Coors 24 can like box over his head with 2 eyes, cut out of it, and a nose and a mouth, and he was going around the O Club with that thing on his head. It's pretty funny. But I remember him coming up to me when I graduated. He goes, we put a lot of blood and sweat in you, Sluggo. Too good. And then, like I said, years later when he was a major, I found him at an AFA convention, talked to him for a long time. Told him how much I appreciated him spending all the time he did trying to get me through the program. I washed back a class, back to another T-38 class, and had another just phenomenal instructor. And he was what we call a first assignment IP, a FAPE, a Lieutenant Dave Fouché, big, huge bodybuilder guy. Later went on to fly F-15s. While he was flying F-15s one day out of Iceland, had his neck kind of go out, or so he thought, and had difficulty landing the airplane. Landed it kind of hard, but got it back down. Took him to a dock down in Reykjavik. The dock in Reykjavik says, we need to get you back to the States right now. Got him back to the States and confirmed he had MS. And he died about 8 years later. I just got in touch with his wife not too long ago. She found me. Fucci, that was his call sign, Fucci. And man, he was good. And he was crashing. They were living in Colorado Springs because he was like a squadron commander there at the academy. Everybody wanted to be on in his group, and he was now in a wheelchair. They medically disqualified him from the Air Force and discharged him. And as he was going by the T-38 at the gate, he passed away right as they went underneath. She told me. Elin, his wife. God, that was a hard one to take when I found that out. Hey, did you hear what happened to Fucci? No, what happened? He was flying a Eagle jet, had a physiological incident, and can't fly anymore. So, yeah, Roger, if that's the doctor, I really want to get a hold of him.
I'm already reaching out to our pastor right now.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Because yeah, if like I said, if you see him and you say, "Are you the guy they call the doctor that has the 5 rules of flying?" and he lights up, then you just saved a lot of us a lot of work that we've been looking for him.
I will definitely let you know.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
What time is it? We've just been going and going and going.
We've been at it about 3 hours.
Yeah. Anybody else? Cyborg, Dark, Fever. Any of you guys got any questions? Comments?
Yeah,
Answers?
when are you running for president there, Sluggo?
I first have to overcome this problem, Cyborg, of kill them all and let God sort it out before I run for president.
Amen to that.
I've got this problem, Cyborg. I've got Mother Teresa on one shoulder and Darth Vader on the other, all vying for time in my head.
Darth Vader's winning.
And there are days when Darth Vader wins. Darth Vader is actually winning today. I've had a pretty rough day with trying to get my podcast episode out. My Adobe kept crashing. I get the pinwheel of death every time I open the file, and I couldn't figure out why. Oh, it was so frustrating. This went on for 2 days. Anyway, yeah, I have a lot of things that you do not want in a politician. And one of them is I do not suffer stupid people well. You know, and I've told you guys I'm an independent, all right? And I think there are people in the Democrat side and the Republican side. I'm in Utah, all right? I will say this, okay? I hope Mitt Romney loses big time when it comes to his election next year. I hope he gets, I hope he doesn't even make it to the election. I hope he gets primary. And I think that's going to happen. He has not done well like we thought he would. We thought, okay, well, he's taken over for this old guy, Orrin Hatch, that's been in there forever. And everybody says, he's the next Orrin Hatch. He's the next Orrin Hatch. No, he wasn't. And I'm not so sure. I'm not a real Orrin Hatch fan either. But we do have 2 really good ones here in the House. I don't know how many of you know Chris Stevens. He's a former B-1 guy. He set the world record for a bone going around the world. Dropped on 5 different ranges in 5 different continents going around the world at B-1. And then our representative where I live here in South Jordan is Burgess Owens, the famous safety, NFL safety. And I met him last summer at Gail Halverson passed away, and we had this big celebration of life for him. They actually brought in a C-54 and replicated the candy drop over Spanish Fork Airport. 300 chocolate bars out the back of the plane. And Burgess Owens, saw me in my leather jacket with my AMC patch, my name tag. And he took his Super Bowl ring off and put it on my finger and took a picture of me going like this with a Super Bowl ring on. Really nice guy. Mike Lee is our senator, and he seems to be doing pretty well. But I'll tell you, I don't think Romney will get reelected. Not with what I'm hearing. We're not real pleased with our Republican governor right now either, too, Spencer Cox. He's done some pretty nasty things. Don't trust that Mormon mafia, man, whatever you do. But I went independent a long time. Now, some of you see this picture like right over here. All right. And those of you that go back into my history will know that Rush Limbaugh was actually a close personal friend. By the way, his wife sent me 38 of his best cigars out of his humidor, which I've got right here. I don't smoke. I am a member of the LDS Church. I don't smoke. So I've been keeping them back there. I don't know what I'm going to do with them all. Anyway, a lot of my political leanings lean kind of the way Rush did. And Mr. Limbaugh, and this was a podcast episode, Whipsaw, you know this. Some of you may not. I had a son who fought cancer for 14 months and died. A very aggressive, heinous type of cancer, a bone cancer called osteosarcoma. Mr. Limbaugh made sure that my family would never have to worry about money during that 14 months. And when it came time to move my son to various appointments around, particularly down in Houston, Texas at MD Anderson, as it really got aggressive, Rush sent his G550 up to Iowa to make sure he got there in style and on time whenever we needed it. Even when he was terminally ill, he moved Jeff around and brought him out here to see the family and got him home and back to Iowa. And then when he passed away, Jeffrey's container for his remains wouldn't fit inside Rush's jet into the cargo area. It was a ½ inch too wide. It didn't matter how he moved the box. Rush rented another Gulfstream jet with a cargo door. And we got him out here. And I accompanied my son's body on that jet that was painted gunship gray and black. What do you think this thing did for a living? And the pilot told me, "You will be happy to know that SEAL Team 6 and Rob O'Neill were sitting in this airplane and went to Djibouti to free Captain Phillips of the Maersk, Alabama. This is the airplane that took them there." And I thought, isn't that ironic? My son going to his final resting place on the very airplane that took SEAL Team 6 to Djibouti to free Captain Phillips of the Maersk, Alabama. And may I just tell you one thing about, I don't know about your politics, and I'm not here to argue the politics or talk about the politics, but we were having dinner with Rush Limbaugh, and he told me something that I've never forgotten. And he kind of reached over to me and he took my hand. He says, "Don't you ever do that to me again." I go, "What?" He says, "Don't you ever do that to me again. Do you understand?" I go, "What?" He said, "You needed my help and you wouldn't ask me because I was Rush Limbaugh. Don't you ever do that to me again." And he went on to explain. He says, "Mark, when I went national, I knew I'd be wealthy. I didn't know I'd be this wealthy. And I made a promise to myself, if I became wealthy, that I would help as many people as I could, as often as I could, and it didn't matter what the price was." And he says, "I want you to remember that if you ever become wealthy," and I'm talking, you can go out and pretty much give anybody, anytime, anywhere, the support that they need, you do it. Because the satisfaction that you'll have in that is going to be huge. So the other night I tested this. And there's a store here called Neaters that has bread and all kinds of stuff. And I walked in, and I'm not bragging to myself. I'm just telling you how interesting these things fall. There was an older gentleman with his back to me. I didn't recognize the back of his head. And something just said to me, "Pay for his stuff." And it wasn't very expensive. It was like $11.50 or something like that, $12, $12.50 maybe. And I said, "Hey, I'm going to pay it forward. I'm going to pay for that gentleman's stuff so that when you give it to him, just say, hey, this is paid for by somebody, and let him go. And so I was kind of hemming and hawing around, looking at the bread and everything like that. And the gentleman got up, and the gal handed him stuff, told him that I was kind of out of earshot. And the man turned and walked out and saw me, got this big smile on his face. And it was Earl Larson, is this gentleman's name, a member of our LDS ward who is fighting cancer and is not doing too well. So you never know whose life you're going to impact with some little small deed, and it happened to be Earl walking up, and he saw me and he goes, I knew right away it was you that did it. And now his wife is fighting cancer too. They're both fighting at the same time. His had been in remission in his back. Hers is kind of a rheumatoid joint thing. So we all have fun here talking about airplanes and flying. Just remember that if you have the opportunity to help somebody, even though you may not understand the consequences when that little voice says, hey, help that person out, just do it. Because Earl was almost in tears. Joyce couldn't even get up to walk around the house, and he was coming there to just get something for her to eat, him to eat, and I just happened to have that inclination to go, it's only $12.50. I'll pay for his. That's one of the great conversations I had with that man was, if you have the opportunity to help, do so. Some of you have the opportunity in your communities. Roger, you're talking about, being active in church and everything. Just remember that. Sometimes it backfires though. The other day, opening a door for some woman. You don't need to do that. Whatever. Whatever. Anything else, gentlemen? Cyborg, I would not make a great president. I don't get much sleep.
Can't be any worse than what we got now.
Well, gentlemen, I will tell you, people call me a conspiracy theorist, and I'm starting to take that as a compliment now. And, but I will tell you, gentlemen, there's bad things being done on both sides. And I'm a typical military conservative, I guess you could call me. A military conservative, okay? I do not want to go to war. And those of you that have seen war understand why you don't want to go to war. I saw it from 28,000 feet, and my view was a little different than some of you that may have been kicking indoors and seeing it up close and personal. And I'm glad I don't have to deal with that aspect of warfare where it was so close and personal. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people in this planet that are really bad. We had a saying in the KAOC during OIF, there's some people in this world that just need killing. And I do believe that. I'll give you an instance. I'll give you one example. Anyone who traffics a child or whatever it means, anyone, that is a part of that. It's not part of the same human race you and I are. And being a religious person, that's one of the things that I say in my prayers, that human trafficking come to an end. And that those people be exposed and brought to justice. And those that are trafficking in children, for whatever reason, are shown no mercy. Just like they showed the children no mercy. That kind of thing I will gladly put back on my uniform and go fight. As I'm sure most of you would too, because kids. We all have kids. I can't imagine any of my children having to go through that. That's where I really become Darth Vader. That's where I say, kill them all and let God sort it out. I got to hear, is it Tim Ballard, the guy that runs Underground Railroad, spoke at a thing here just recently, and he was talking about how they just freed 220 kids based on something really unusual piece of information he got. That when they tracked it down, there was 220 kids on the end of it that they were able to free in like Honduras or something like that. I can't remember where. It was an amazing story. He does amazing work, but I'm surprised that he's still alive. He goes into some pretty incredible detail about this too, which was that they were able to free 220 kids from this ring that was, believe it or not, a known pedophile in Amsterdam that they followed to some restaurant where he happened to have a meeting with one of his facilitators that they overheard, and it all started from there. Honduras, Amsterdam. Ugh. Anyway, all right. I promised I would not get on a political soapbox, and I have. I apologize, gentlemen.
I've enjoyed it, at least from my side. I did have a question, and I do apologize. I had to step out to put my son to bed, my 6-year-old son. You talked about some of the you mentioned the dime perspective in terms of all these other countries that we've had to go into, you know, and restructure. In your times with Iraq, and I'm sorry I'm diverging us from the KC-135, what was your perspective from more of the people that were not necessarily in stances within the military or within the political regime of Iraq? Did you talk to anybody, you know, in your times over there?
What? Plenty of my, you know what, Roger? Plenty of my friends did. Okay, and I'll give you an example. All right, and this is a really cool one. And it goes back to OIF, Craig, so you'll enjoy this. The Northern Air Defense Commander was a colonel. And he'd shot all of his missiles, most of his SAM sites completely destroyed by HARMs or JDAMs or JSOW, Joint Standoff Weapon, okay? And he's out of missiles. He's out of a job. And he says, my war is over. What am I going to do? And so during the latter end of the war, the last week of the war, he turns around and starts walking back to his family in Baghdad. And he walks up to a Marine checkpoint with just young privates at it. And they're checking everybody going through, all right? And he stripped everything off of his uniform. But, you know, the two Marine privates, they understand what he's wearing. They don't know who he is or what rank he is, but they understand who this guy is. And they go, sir, you obviously were a member of the military at one point. Where are you going? And he goes, my name is Colonel Ahmed. My war is over. I was the Northern Air Defense Commander for all the surface air missiles. All of my systems have been blown up. My war is over. I'm going back to my family. And the private, one of the Marine privates, took his identification, everything. He's looking at it. You know, of course, it's in Arabic. He doesn't understand a whole lot of it. He goes, where are you going, Colonel? Where is your family right now? He said, well, they're in Baghdad. And he goes, where in Baghdad? I need to know where you're going, Colonel. He says, well, they're in this district. And the private says to him, sir, Baghdad's about to go down. The Marines are on the outskirts, and the third ID is making their thunder runs. So this is like first, second, third, 4th of April. And he says, you need to avoid these areas because there's going to be a lot of activity here, and here at the airport, all these kinds of things. Can you get to your home in Baghdad by avoiding these places? And he goes, yeah, I can. He goes, okay, Colonel, that's kind of the situation in Baghdad right now. Go home, be with your family, kiss mom, hug your kids. You survived. Enjoy your journey. And the young Marine private hands him back all of his ID and stuff like that. He puts it in his pocket and he walks about 7, 8 steps and drops to his knees. And the two privates are like, "Sir, are you okay? Are you all right? Are you okay?" And he goes, I'm a little wobbly right now. I was a little afraid to talk to you guys." And they're like, "Well, why?" And he says, "I thought you'd kill me." He goes, "Colonel, why would we do that?" You know, they find out from his things that he's a colonel. He says, "Colonel, go home, be with your family. We are not going to keep you or retain you or put you in jail or anything like that. We're not here to mess with the Iraqi people. There's only really 3 reasons we're here: Saddam and his sons." And the colonel started bawling in front of these 2 Marines. And I get this story from the Navy captain who was in charge of all these checkpoints. He was the one who told me this story, because these privates came back and told him, "Hey, we saw this Iraqi colonel that was the air defense commander. He's going here. This is where he lives. You know, if you guys want to go talk to him after the war." And he's just on his knees and he's bawling, all right? Because he thought going to that checkpoint, his life was over. He'd never see his family again. And here are these 2 young 19-year-old privates. He's probably in his late 40s, early 50s maybe, who tell him, "Go home, stay home, hug your wife, kiss your kids, hug them, stay out of the war," and let him go. So after the war and everything's starting to settle down, that colonel leaves his house and he goes finds like another checkpoint or some other group of military folks, and he goes, "I want to help. This is who I am. This is what I did. Where can you use me?" And he became part of the coalition to help rebuild Iraq. And it wasn't just stories like that. I was actually emailing a doctor who was giving us really, really good intelligence up in the north, who, because he was a doctor, was allowed to move around and scoot around and do things. But none of the military guys up there knew that he was sending in pretty detailed reports about what was going on up there. And there was like his intel report, and then there was like his personal report. And we at the KAOC just thought, this guy, we got to support this guy. And we were all sending him emails every once in a while saying, "Doc, where are you at today? What do you need help with? You know, do you need medical supplies? You know, whatever. We can get them to you. We'll get you hooked up with the special forces guys up there, all these kinds of things." And he didn't want to be around him because he knew it would put his life in danger. But he said something in one of his emails to all of us to the effect that, "When you American military guys stand in front of Allah and our judge, I will shout your names in paradise." I think is how he put it. "I will shout your names in paradise." So we had people that we were working with that understood we were there to get rid of a tyrant. And, you know, I hear all this stuff about, you know, no blood for oil. Our import of oil from Iraq did not hardly budge at all, if I remember right. You know, it's moved around. I mean, the whole oil and petroleum community is moving like crazy right now. But there were people that were there that once they realized the Americans are not here to kill you. And yes, there are civilian deaths and civilians that were driving in their vehicles coming up to checkpoints at full speed that our guys just couldn't identify, and they had to protect themselves. And those kinds of things are sad. There was one really famous one where this van full of family came up, and there was, I think, 6 of them in the van and only 2 of them lived. because they came screaming up to a Marine checkpoint that the father, I've got to get my kids out of here. I got to get my family out of here. And just didn't realize, slow down. Don't try and run through a checkpoint because we'll think you're a bomb. And what happened was the mother, like a day later, opened the door and fell out of the van. And that kind of thing happens in war, and it's sad. But for the most part, I remember we came to General Mosley and said, we're going to drop the Moab on this battalion of this Republican Guard. And he looked at all of us and said, why? Why are you going to do that? He says, well, we got it loaded on the MC-130. We're going to go up here to, and get rid of these guys. He goes, look, guys, the war is winding down. These guys are retreating. We're not going to drop this big bomb on a retreating army. I don't care who they are. We're going to give them the opportunity to live. That was from a 3-star general, guys. He wasn't going to use a weapon that we didn't need to use on a legitimate target, but they were retreating. And of course, the rules kind of change. As you know, the Geneva rules change. Well, when they're on the offensive, it's different. When they're on the defense, it's different. When they're retreating, it's different too. We went to extremes to make sure that civilian casualties were kept at a minimum. And even some of the military folks, we weren't going to drop this big bomb on it. There was no reason to. They're all going home. They're all deserting. And that's a story you never hear about. Everybody wants to put the military in a bad light. They never hear about these stories of this, SAM commander, this SAM colonel, or this doctor, or General Mosley going, no, we ain't going to do that. We're not dropping this bomb. Yeah, it'll be cool. But we ain't doing it, guys. We're not here for cool factor. We're here to save as many lives of the Iraqis as we can, and obviously save as many of our military and coalition lives as we can, by whatever means we can. And if that means we withhold ordnance and fire on legitimate targets so that they can live to be examples to their kids and their grandkids, then so be it. We loved Mike Mosley, guys. He was absolutely a fabulous commander and had a heart bigger than Dallas, just a heart of gold, and made decisions on, will this put our forces at risk? Will it put the Iraqis at risk too if we do this? It was unbelievable. Well, a lot of people are like, why wouldn't we do it? Well, why would you? If these guys are retreating, guys, why waste the bomb? Particularly that one, that's going to wipe out so many people and so many buildings. Why? There's no need. And unfortunately, a lot of the military commanders that are where they're at now, some of them I've known, and they were fools when they were captains. Except for there's 2 guys that I will go to war with anytime. And that is the current Pacific Air Forces commander, Ken Wilsbach, and Whipsaw. That's the guy I flew with, that the picture's in the book. Ken Wilsbach Cruiser is the PACAF commander right now. The other one is Glenn Van Erck, who just testified the other day in front of Congress about the balloon. He's another certified smart guy that I would trust. All right. He's the NORAD commander. He's the guy that had to make the decision on what the balloon was doing. And I listened to his testimony. He's right. Hey, the balloon's coming across Alaska. It's not doing anything to us right now. What? Sorry. My wife came in to get a blanket. Glenn Van Erck. Fats Van Erck. Cyborg, you're welcome. Thanks for staying for so long. Fats Van Erck, got up there. Hey, it showed no hostile intent and it wasn't endangering anybody. But when it got across the middle of the United States, well, then we had to figure out what we're going to do with it. And again, I do a whole podcast on that too. And I even have the communication between the F-22 pilots, the F-15 pilots, and the Huntress, the Northeast Air Defense Sector guys talking. Very fascinating. Anyway. Okay, gentlemen. Almost 4 hours of this. It has been so much fun talking to you guys, though. Thanks for letting me go in different directions with some of these things. I apologize for waxing a little political, but you have to understand, gentlemen, the war is a political tool. What was it von Clausewitz said? You know, war is politics by another means. And you, seriously, those four things, diplomatic, information, military, and economic, are ingrained in our heads to go look at, okay, you know, what's the economic outcome if we do this? Will it hurt the economy of our adversary to a point where it's going to put them in serious danger? Is it going to put us in serious danger economically if we do this? There's a lot of people right now that don't care about the economics of this, which really concerns me. Why are we spending so much money to Ukraine when all of that money could be here helping people here? 130 billion to Ukraine. Really? When we got homeless vets. And not just vets, just people that are struggling, okay? All right, off the political soapbox again. Thank you, guys. Craig, thanks once again for inviting me to do this. Apologize, I was a little late showing up. Like I said, I want all of you guys to follow this. A very dear Marine Corps friend of mine who was also an FBI agent, beginning on May 23rd, is going to drive a 1952 Willys Jeep from San Francisco to New York and then auction off the Jeep. And he wants to come to places where he could talk to law enforcement, vets, or just people. And if you want, Craig, I'll send you his route and everything, where he's going to be. And but he wants to talk to people, and he needs people to help him drive and all these kinds of things. His name is Scott Manifusco, infantry Marine captain. But we're trying to get the word out about Scott doing this. He's got this big, huge Winnebago that's got the big Marine Corps thing on one side and the police thing on the other, and he wants to drive the Jeep all the way across, but he doesn't think he's going to have enough drivers that he may have to tow it behind the RV. But he's got a whole route, you know, all planned all the way across from May 23rd through July 18th or something like that to New York, and then he's going to auction off the Jeep when he gets to New York, and all the money's going to tunnels to towers. So go to, what is it? I'll send you the link, Craig, to his thing. Send it out to your guys. Because it'll be fascinating to see. And he wants to talk to people while he's driving, talk to people at the VFWs, the law enforcement, every city he stops in, and just sit down with them for a few minutes and just say, you know, tell us your story. And he's going to do this like a podcast while he's doing it.
Oh, nice.
It'll be very fascinating.
I watched Sergeant Major LeHue go across the, was it 21? Not 21.
Yeah.
Whatever road that is up.
Yeah.
US, I think it's 20 actually. Across the northern part of the country, and he was a gunny with me in Nazaria. He was the track platoon sergeant. So
yeah,
I've known him a while, but yeah, they walked though. They walked from coast to coast.
Yeah, he's got this beautiful 1952 Willys Jeep that he's completely refurbished, and then he's done this motorhome. He says it's going to cost him $30,000, but he's going to do it no matter what. He's asking for donations and help drive it and all these kinds of things, but he says he's going no matter what. He's leaving in 55 days or something like that. But we're trying to get the word out to Valorous TV, and you'd think like Home Depot and all these guys would like get involved. Hasn't heard a word back from him. So if any of you know the CEOs of some of these big companies like Lowe's and Home Depot, have him get
looking at you, Whipsaw.
Yeah.
I actually know a guy who's good friends with Ken Langone, who's co-founder of Home Depot. But like if I could scratch that if you want me to.
Well, you've got my email address, okay? If you could do that, that'd be great. Because what he wants to do is he Tunnels to Towers gets $5 million a year from Home Depot, but he can't get anybody at Home Depot to talk to him. And he wants to put like a Home Depot thing on the side of the Jeep because Home Depot has done so much for Tunnel to Towers, but he can't get anybody to talk to him in their marketing department. He's sent them emails, has called them. Yeah, we'll get back to you. And hasn't heard a thing. I mean, imagine what an incredible marketing tool this would be for some of these big companies to sit there and actually track this guy as he goes across the country in this Winnebago and Jeep. And he wants to put like this tracker on the thing so people can go to like the website that he has and watch it all. And then watch as he talks to people and everything like that. What an incredible marketing tool. Even Black Rifle Coffee Company won't talk to him. I don't know why.
Really?
Probably because he's not a 501c3 or whatever. But he's doing it for Tunnels to Towers. All the money's going there. But anyway. Yeah, I don't know if Whipsaw, you heard my email. It's my name, mark@markasera.com.
I got it. It's funny because I also know one of the co-founders of Black Rifle Coffee Company. It was Air Force Special Operations. We were good friends when I was stationed down to Herbert Field, at Eglin Air Force Base. Herbert Field, right? Part of Eglin Air Force Base around there in Destin, Florida. His name's Jared. I forget his last name, but I could actually poke around if you really want me to. It's a small world.
If you can, he talked to Hafen, the CEO. And the new, co-CEO, they all went, "Oh, this is just super. I mean, incredible."
Perfect.
And he says, "Well, then let me stop at Black Rifle Coffee Company, places all the way across." Nobody in marketing will talk to him now. After he talked to Hafen for an hour.
Interesting.
And he's going, "This is great. This is great. This is great." Now he can't get anybody to talk to him. Anyway, all right. Enough marketing for one night. Yeah, what's up? If you can, that'd be great. Thanks for picking up the book.
All right.
Thanks for writing it.
Find me on Facebook, message me, and I'll give you my address, and you can send
I
it
absolutely will. I'll do that right now, actually.
All right.
Yeah.
And what I'll have you do is I'll have you put another stamped envelope, folded up in the envelope, so that all I got to do is sign it, put it in the envelope, and then I'll just send it back to you. That's how I do it.
Perfect.
Okay. And that goes for any of you that pick up the book.
I literally just ordered it.
Did you? Perfect. Thanks for picking it up. Thanks for doing that. All right, gentlemen. Thank you once again for doing this, Craig. And
always a pleasure, Sluggo. Always a pleasure. Always enjoy having you here and enjoy the book, enjoy the podcasts. One of these days I might order a plane to put on the wall. I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's right. Wall pilot.
Yeah.
Custom aviation art for the walls of your home office or hangar. Guys, I do profile drawings like aviation fatheads too. I'm working on helicopters, Apache, and Sea Kings. It's taken me months to do them though because I don't know anything about helicopters. But I mean, we go all the way back to World War I. I just put AWACS and RC-135s up on the ready to print. Boy, they look good too. The guy that does these things is really good. And we're getting ready to do lots of Tomcats. Everybody's been asking, Tomcats.
No, those guys are here tonight.
And believe it or not, we have the early A, the late A, the B, and the D. And I can put any weapons load on it, any markings, any names. That's how I do this.
Yep.
Thank you once again, gentlemen, for listening to a old knuckle dragon tanker guy and spending time. It's been a lot of fun. Good questions, good conversation. And we'll look forward to the next time, whenever that is, 6 months down the road, whatever. All right.
This has been very nice. Thank you so much. And I'll shoot you an email tomorrow if that's the gentleman that goes to my church.
Yeah, please do, Roger. If that's him, boy, you just solved a big problem for us. We've been looking all over for him. And you know what? The chances are, Roger, if it's not him, then he knows the B-52 community is really small. Then he knows him. He knows he knows where he is or knows of him and how to get a hold of him.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. The one or two times that I've talked about him, my understanding is he is suffering from dementia, so he's struggled the last few years.
Oh,
But,
I hope not.
from what his daughter has told me, anytime somebody brings up B-52s, it just clicks in like it's yesterday's memory for him.
Yeah, and see that's the way it is with a lot of these guys that have dementia, and I hope I would wish that on anybody, but if it's him, man, I really like to get a hold of him and just talk to him on the phone.
Oh, definitely. I will, like I said, I will let you know as soon as I find out tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. Gentlemen, have a good night. Talk to you
You too,
later.
Sluggo.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, gentlemen. Take care. Enjoy your computer game. Remember, we fight to win.
Did you hear that, Turbin?